Good evening. The board will now reconvene in open session at 7:05 p.m. on September 4, 2018 in the Plano ISD Administration Building. I'm Missy Bender, President of the Plano ISD Board of Trustees. On the board's behalf, I wish to extend a warm welcome to all who are present and to our web and video viewers. We will conduct our meeting this evening focusing on the district's two major ongoing goals. Number one, ensure the continued improvement in student learning. And number two, ensure the efficient use of financial resources and budgeting. Let me introduce my fellow trustees and staff. Seated to my left are Sarah Bonser, Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Teresa Williams, Chief Operating Officer, Nancy Humphrey, Board Secretary, and Trustee Tammy Richards. Seated to my right are Board Vice President Dr. Yorm Solomon, Trustee David Stawley, Trustee Jerry Chambers, Trustee Angela Powell, and Executive Assistant to the Superintendent and Board of Trustees Sharon Nowak. Ms. Bonser, will you verify that we are in compliance with the provisions of the Texas Open Meetings Act regarding the notice for this meeting?
Yes, President Bender, this meeting has been posted in compliance with the Open Meetings Act.
Thank you. We will now take a moment for an inspirational message, and our Board Secretary Nancy Humphrey will offer the inspirational message, and she will then follow that with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Missy. Tonight, my inspirational message is about success. And just over a couple of weeks ago, we welcomed over 52,000 schools back to school. And we will continue to welcome more students in the coming weeks. And before school even started, the district hosted a very lively, albeit warm, event for all district staff at Clark Stadium. And it was to be inspired about the upcoming school year. Everyone walked away with the commitment to support all schools, given the mindset that your success is my mission. So what inspires us to keep this momentum throughout the year? Here are some things to consider. When I hear from our superintendent that Plano ISD is a school that prepares kids for life beyond academics and that we're all learning all the time, no double standards, what we expect of the kids, we expect of ourselves, I get inspired. And then something else I learned from Dr. Neil Matkin, who is the president of Collin College. He says that success is made up of successive successes. And so what he means by that is every successful step, and I can't say that, my goodness, every successful step towards a goal brings confidence that the next step is possible. And so knowing our district's leadership has this mindset for student success, that gives me confidence that our students are in the best of hands. Each student and our staff members must continue to have constantly greater goals to maintain this momentum throughout the year. Therefore, I am very hopeful that we all share the motto that your success is my mission, and will have enduring inspiration throughout the school year and tonight as we conduct our meeting. Now, if you will stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We will now move to the recognitions on our agenda. With the opening of the 2018-19 school year, we welcome to Plano ISD students and teachers to the newly renovated and very tidy buildings that reflect so well the excellent reputation earned by the district. This is such an exciting time of the year that we sometimes fail to pause and offer thank you to those who contributed to our readiness before this year's August 13 deadline. Keep in mind it was an earlier deadline, so they had even less time to get all of this important work done. On behalf of the Board of Trustees and Plano ISD, allow me to express our heartfelt appreciation to the following individuals and groups who are critical behind the scenes and paramount to opening operational, clean, safe, and secure campuses for Plano ISD families and staff. Tonight, the board has the pleasure of recognizing our own Plano ISD facilities and construction staff who collectively made the impossible possible in this shortened summer. Thank you for your commitment to the mission of getting the buildings ready for student learning. And when your name is called, please stand for recognition and then come and join us at the front of the room, because we will, take pictures when we're all complete. Randy McDowell, CFO, will make the introductions. Mr. McDowell.
Yes, thank you, President Bender. It is an honor tonight to recognize some of our truly dedicated employees. I refer to them as the A-team. And I've got to admit, they had me sweating just a little bit a couple of days before school started this year. But they came through as always. And I'd like to introduce the facility services, the construction team. So first we have our Executive Director, Juan Ramos, and he's been with the district since 2012. Assistant Director, Tony Pearson, he's been with the district since 2006. Johnny Picacci, he's the long timer. He's been with the district since 1989. We have Construction Administrator Robert Dean, Construction Administrator Warren Kinsey, and Construction Administrator Quincy Laura that was not able to be here tonight. And so that's our team that worked very hard this summer, pulling off some summer projects.
Well, we certainly thank you. We certainly thank you for all of the hard work that you undertook on behalf of our staff and students this summer. Would you mind coming up here to join us in front, because you will soon have company. We would also like to thank and note that the technology team, campus staff members, and ABM custodians worked through the weekend as well. We appreciate their extra efforts as they worked getting campuses ready for students. As I mentioned, we have even more recognitions to make, and when I announce your name, please join the facility's staff members at the front of the room. We would like to express our appreciation to the City of Plano for living with us through our construction and renovation projects. I don't see him here tonight, but we would like to mention that City Manager Bruce Glasscock in recognition for the efforts of the city. So Bruce, we thank you for your teamwork. We are also grateful to Plano Fire and Rescue, whose officers went above and beyond. Let me tell you how. There was so much work to be done, they even came to some campuses on Sunday, the day before school opened August 12, to certify that buildings were in fact safe for occupancy the very next day on Monday. Plano Fire Rescue is represented tonight by Fire Chief Sam Greif. So we thank you, Chief. And the Building Inspection Department from the city for your dedication to our school community. Now our attention turns to Safety and Security Services Department, those in that department, as we continue to take safety measures to safeguard our campuses and facilities in collaboration with the Plano Police Department. Our own Safety and Security Services Department is led by Executive Director Joe Parks. He works with all law enforcement. He's at the back of the room. I know you're not seeing him there, but he will come join us up here as well. He works with all law enforcement agencies to constantly improve our efforts. Joe, we thank you for your leadership. So let's give him a... And now we extend our heartfelt appreciation to the Plano Police Department, our collaborative partner in all matters regarding safety and security. That is represented this evening by Police Chief Greg Russian. I think, Chief, you've brought another individual with you. Is there someone with you? Oh, Maso. Okay. So, I'm sorry I didn't have your name, but he is with the Building Inspections Department, who works so closely with us and the fire department. So, please join us at the front. Thank you. So we extend our heartfelt appreciation to the Plano Police Department, our collaborative partner in all matters regarding safety and security. And we are eager, as you know, to grow our School Resource Officer program and to join in this growth together as a multi-organizational project on behalf of Plano school children. Chief Russian, thank you for continuing to be our partner in public safety and for your department's efforts to keep Plano ISD safe. Along with Chief Russian, we'd also like to extend our appreciation to Plano Detective Luke Grant. He's at the back of the room here. So Officer Grant, would you come join us if you can? The board wishes to honor your service and commitment to safety in schools and for your protection of trustees and our audiences at all of our public meetings. Thank you for your service to our staff, students, and families. So, board members, do you have anything you want to say before we maybe join together and get a quick picture? Any comments?
Well, when Missy says that they had a lot of work to do over the weekend, she's not joking. It was all hands on deck to get these schools open, and so we really appreciate the extra efforts on the part of the city, both fire and police, to help us along in that path. It was, of course, had to be ready to open on Monday, so for you guys to come out on a Sunday is impressive and greatly appreciated.
Okay, so again, thank you, and let's take a quick photo together. Debbie, would you like to arrange this as you would like for us to? Okay.
And a quick public thank you to Plano Fire and Rescue. I actually had a blowout a couple weeks ago driving down Central Expressway in rush hour. I was in Richardson, and it was actually two Plano Fire Department folks who were following me in a truck. They were actually going down to do a training in Dallas. They stopped, changed the tire, and got me back on the road. So thank you very much. You serve all over in all different capacities.
We will now have a public comment session introduction. So we move to the public comment portion of our agenda for topics that are related to agenda items. For the public comment session, public comment cards are accepted from 6 to 7 p.m. and persons who wish to participate complete the card before the meeting begins indicating the topic. Cards are not accepted after 7 p.m. and are not transferable to other parties or speakers. All cards were collected and given to Carla Oliver, Assistant Superintendent for Government, Community, and Planning Initiatives, or a representative of the Communications Department. 30 minutes have been allotted to hear persons who desire to make comments to the board. 15 minutes will be allotted at this time for speakers wishing to address the board about a topic on the agenda. At the conclusion of the agenda, speakers who wish to address the board about non-agenda topics will also be allotted 15 minutes to speak. Delegations of more than 5 persons shall please appoint 1 person to present their views to the board. Ms. Oliver, do we have any speakers for the public comment session regarding agenda topics?
We do not.
Okay. So if we happen to have are we going to have comments at the end of the meeting?
No, ma'am.
No, okay, so I will not read that. We will now move to the consent agenda. which includes items of a routine and/or recurring nature grouped together under one action item. Board members, are there any requests to remove items from the consent agenda for further separate consideration?
I'd like to ask to remove item M from the consent agenda for separate consideration.
All right. Board Vice President Yorm Solomon has requested that item M, revisions to the Student Code of Conduct, be removed from the consent agenda. So this item will be moved to items for discussion and action as item A2, and it will be discussed by the board at that time. There will be no discussion on this item at this time. Are there any other requests to remove items from the consent agenda for further consideration? Hearing none, we will now proceed to vote on the consent agenda. Do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Trustees approves the consent agenda, removing item M.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I second.
I have a motion by Jerry Chambers, a second by Nancy Humphrey, that the Board of Trustees approve the consent agenda, removing item M. We will now proceed to vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Motion passes unanimously, 7-0. All right. Ms. Oliver, do we have any other recognitions, Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts in the room?
Thank you so much for asking me. We do. We have 3 troops present tonight, so if you would please stand when I call your troop number. Troop 181, Troop 1776, 1776, and Troop 25.
Okay, welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Ms. Oliver. The next section on the agenda relates to items for discussion and action. Our first 2 items for discussion and action this evening support the district's goal to ensure continued improvement in student learning. Item A1, we are going to hear from Dr. Teresa Williams, our Chief Operating Officer, where she will update and consider for board approval the pre-kindergarten guiding principles for planning purposes. So we will continue the discussion of pre-K that we undertook at the last board meeting and gave some direction. The board gave direction to staff for further work, and administration will now present principles and information that we requested at the August 21 meeting. And Dr. Williams, will you please begin?
Thank you. So tonight's presentation is based on feedback that was provided to us at the August 21st meeting. There are several items and additional information that was requested for further discussion. These follow-up items are listed on the second page of your blue handout. So in your folder, there was a blue and white handout. And the first page are the guiding principles that we'll go over in just a little bit. But the second is a list of items that were captured as far as to bring back for further discussion. And so the first 4 items we are bringing back tonight. And then subsequent items that are listed on this spreadsheet will either come throughout the year in the form of a board update or in the 18-19 plan of work. So tonight's presentation is divided into 4 sections, and this presentation will, Katrina and Susanna will be presenting some of the items, but it will be divided into 4 sections. So we're going to first look at the guiding principles for pre-K planning and programming. We're bringing an update on the wait list, and then we're going to take a deep dive into the options that were brought at the last meeting. So that deep dive is based on the recommendation to look at option A in combination with options B, C, D1, and D2. And then finally, we'll take a look at our district maps so that you can get a visual of the needs across the district. So if you will flip to the first page of our guiding principles. And these guiding principles was our first stab at taking all of the feedback and comments from the last board meeting, putting it together in a collaborative format between all of our staff. We reviewed this several times and vetted it through each cabinet member, and we're bringing that forward tonight for review, discussion, and acceptance. So the guiding principles for programming is inclusive of all 5 of our pre-K programs. So the state-funded half-day, full-day, PPCD, Head Start, and tuition-based. So first, the Plano ISD Board of Trustees is committed to closing the opportunity and achievement gaps for all learners by ensuring high-quality early childhood programming that builds strong social, emotional, and academic foundation for PISD's youngest learners. Plano ISD administration will use the following early childhood guiding principles as a compass for our decision-making. So first, student-to-staff ratios will begin and start at 16:2 with the flexibility to expand to a maximum and no more than 20:2. Half and full-day high-quality programming will be offered at the early childhood schools in order to maximize participation and provide choice for our PISD families. Elementary campus-based pre-K will offer high-quality full-day programming. And then the following guidelines will be used to add new campus-based pre-K classrooms when all existing classes have reached full capacity. And these guidelines are, first, we'll take a look at functional capacity, and that will be the starting point to determining a new site, followed by formal facility walks to verify space and functionality. Then we'll look at new campus-based programs based on geographic need, demographic data, mobility, enrollment trends, total campus classroom availability, transportation options, and other existing campus programs. Every effort will be made to house at least 2 pre-K classrooms at each campus-based program to maximize collaboration and planning. In the event that that is not possible, where we do not have enough children to warrant 2 classrooms to be added, the pre-K teacher will collaborate with other pre-K teachers across the district, as well as collaborate with the kindergarten team at that particular campus. We will do everything that we can to avoid wait lists as possible, but these will be utilized with our Head Start program, which we've always had a wait list option there. And as a last resort, if we have a particular family that's only requesting a particular school and they're not wanting another option. And finally, program evaluation will be conducted annually to ensure the highest quality of programming and progress monitoring. Now, we did not include anything around wraparound services, as that will be part of the work of our task force over the year. So we will add to that once the work of the task force is complete. So those are the guiding principles that we're bringing forward tonight based on the conversation and the feedback that we captured from the August 21st meeting. All right. So the next part is we're going to give an update on our wait list, and I'm going to turn it over to Katrina.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. So we do have good news. It was very apparent at the last board meeting that the wait list situation was a strong priority, and we were asked to address it, and we have. And there were originally 35 names on a wait list, and Susanna Spina, our director of early childhood, personally reached out to every one of them, some multiple times. So I want to give you a little update on the students that were on the wait list. If we think about it in 3 groups, there were 15 who were actually enrolled in a pre-K program, but also on the wait list. There were 2 who actually did not qualify. They didn't live in the district or didn't qualify by income, so they should not have been on the wait list. And there were 18 that were not enrolled at all. So the 15 who were enrolled, 6 were already in a full-day program in a different campus. They were on a wait list for a different location. So we have 5 of those chose to stay where they were this year, and 1 moved to another full-day location. Of the other 9, they were enrolled in a half-day program, and they were waiting for a full-day spot. So 1 of those chose to stay in the half-day program. 7 were moved to full-day. We're still waiting to hear back from the 1 other. And so of the 18 that were not enrolled at that time, Susanna came to my office and said I had got to make some very happy phone calls this week. Very happy families. 2 of those on the list chose half-day. 13 accepted a full-day spot, and 3 we were not able to contact, or there was no response after multiple chances. A couple, I think we don't have good working numbers. So all of that to say, everyone who was contacted and responded was placed in the program of their choice for our PK students.
I would like to express my appreciation for that work, just simply because I think that's important to get everybody that can enroll in a pre-K program. So I thank you all for that.
It was the right thing to do. And just so you know, the best way to place all those students was to be flexible with our class size ratios, as we've talked about. Even with all of those students placed in full-day programs, we only have 2 classes right now who are up to 19, and one is at 18, the rest are under 18 at this point in the year. So the next portion of the presentation is bringing those options back, and you requested that we apply option A, which was the increased class ratio, to all the other options. So that's what we've attempted to do here. Before we move into the first option, I want to update our numbers so we're all thinking about the same numbers. This chart, the one on the left, talks about our capacity in our existing classrooms, and this is full day only. Our original capacity, meaning our 16:2 ratio, we had 626 seats available, or spots. If we apply option A by increasing all of those classes to 20:2, that increases us by 128 spots. And we selected the 20:2 that came out in conversation as kind of a ceiling that you might like for us to consider. So that's what we've applied throughout the presentation. To have a smaller ratio, we could just add a little bit more space needs and money cost in some instances. So adding those together makes our new capacity. If all classes were up to 20:2, we would have 754 seats. So the chart on the right brings back the conversation about our target. Remember, we defined that target by 70% of the economically disadvantaged students in the previous kindergarten class, and that's just a planning target that we had to work with, knowing that if we ever had more than that, of course, we would want to continue to provide space. So taking that target and that new capacity number for the purpose of this presentation, after increasing class sizes, we would only need 69 additional seats from what we already have in our program to accommodate 823 students. So, option A, and some of these slides you'll recognize from last time. We did some cross-outs and some adapted them in some way. This is again listed by feeder, west, central, east. And as we mentioned before, this previous option was increasing by 2, 4, or 6 students. We selected the 4, which would be raising the ratio to 20:2. So as you can see, the bottom white row shows the number of classes that would increase at each of these feeder pattern clusters. The west would add 44 seats, the central 44, and the east 40. That's again if we increase all the full day classes to 20:2. Now you'll notice Head Start's different color there, and we are bound by requirements on Head Start. That's a fixed number, 114. We're not able to change to veer from that. So the summary of option A, again, is applying the new ratio across the district would add 128 seats to the current program, and that would mean our new capacity was 754. The cost would be minimal. I know Susanna's already ordered some additional materials that might be needed for added students, so campuses will not have to worry about that. If at a chair or table, we would certainly provide that. This option alone helps us meet 92% of the targeted number of 823. So now we move on to option B, and you'll recall this one was if we were to add some full-day classrooms at our existing elementary campuses, and that does not mean construction, but taking on an empty classroom where we might have a need to expand our program by a number of classes. This slide again is from last time. We have gone in and highlighted the campuses who do already have full-day programs. The list here indicates campuses that at first glance may have extra space to add a pre-K classroom. So we would have a room or more potentially to expand pre-K into any of these campuses. And again, of course, the guiding principles that Dr. Williams shared would be adhered to, and we're not saying we need an extra classroom on all of these campuses. This is just where we might start with those we know may have extra space. So then we tried to include a slide about the cost of each option, the updated cost for option B. The previous presentation, we were adding 8 classrooms because our ratio was smaller. Now we only need 69 spots after the 128 are added, so that's about 4 classrooms. So we reduced this one, the cost here, to be the cost for adding 4 classrooms, which is $20,000 per setup for each room. Depending on where the classes were added, we might have to add a playground and fence if we brought on a new campus that already had the playgrounds, and the restroom modifications. So our updated summary of option B. First of all, including option A, the 128 seats we would gain from our increased ratio. Option B, adding 4 classrooms, is 80 seats. Remembering we only need 69 to reach that target. That would be a total of 208 new seats. And then there's the cost reflected there, and that would, of course, meet over 100% of our target.
So am I correct to calculate that we're going to be at 834 with option A and B?
A and B, the total altogether?
Yes.
Yes, I believe that's
So the
correct.
100% plus is 834 compared to 823.
Correct,
Okay, 11.
yes. So now on to option C, and this was the option of adding on to our current early childhood schools at all 3. At that time, of course, we were, as I remind you, thinking of adding 8 classrooms, and that's what this slide represents, adding 4 to Beatty, 2 to Pearson, and 2 to Isaacs. However, after applying our new ratio, we only need 4 classrooms, so if we went ahead with 8, the highlighted shows there. This was a little difficult to do, not knowing. There would be a lot of decisions to be made here if you wanted to add on to an early childhood school. The cost slide, again, is the same. But if we just added 4 classes, you could pretty much cut it in half. Now we would need to consider, do we still want to add a kitchen onto each of the early childhoods? That would be an additional cost. When you build a classroom, Randy, what did you say that was? Each classroom cost? Okay, about $250,000. So if we wanted to think of a cost of adding 4 classrooms, we could, a general estimate, cut these costs in half. That makes sense. So the updated summary of option C, and I did not reflect the cutting in half on this slide, I apologize for that, but adding the 128 seats from option A. If we added 8 classrooms, it would be 160 seats. If we just did the 4, of course, it would be 80 seats. And then you could estimate the cost at about half of what's.
So the cost will be 360,000 annual,
For
and
Yes.
for what?
For 4.
For 4, yes.
Yes,
But you
yes.
said 4. And we're going to be at 914 or 91 over our target of 823?
It's over the target, yes.
Okay.
I'm sure your figures are correct. I don't have those added up here.
But the one time would be cut in half also? Because you only
It
did
could be,
4?
depending on how many cafeterias or kitchens you wanted to add, or I guess it could be a third of the cost there listed at the kitchens.
So is that just the cost of the kitchen, or also a cafeteria where the kids will have a place to eat besides the activity room?
Yeah, it's my understanding that cost estimate is several years ago, a couple of years ago, that was only for the kitchens. The thought was not what the students would dine in the activity room.
Okay. I guess I'm just curious as to what other programming goes on in the activity room that we would forego using that as a cafeteria.
So we might be looking at more than 3.38, which is half of the 6.76.
Possibly.
Because we may need to enhance the kitchens in the 3 schools plus at the classroom.
If that was a decision of the board, yes. So moving on to option D, remember we split this into 2 parts. D1 was if we built early childhood 4 only for full day classes. And this is the same as you saw at the last presentation. The building using the same floor plan we have now, childhood school is 19 classrooms. If we build those at 20 to 2, that's 380 seats. Adding additional seats from option A, 128, that brings us to 580 seats.
I think you ran out of battery.
Might be a really long night. So one of the things that was discussed on, the reason we brought out this D1, making it only for full day, I think there was some discussion previously about perhaps bringing the full day classes from the elementary campuses into a new early childhood center. Even if we did that, we would not have capacity to pull in all of the classes that are on the elementary campuses at this time. We would still need to sustain some of those to meet the need to get to our target of 823. And the cost for building early childhood school number 4, thinking it would only be for full day classes, this is totally staffing the building as we would an elementary. And you can see the operating cost will be about 2.5 million. The FF&T is 1.2 and construction is 17.5. If we moved some of the current classes from an elementary campus to the early childhood, of course, you would save $90,000 per room for staff and $20,000 for class setup if we just picked up a class and moved it to the new building. So the summary of option D1, adding our option A, 128 seats, and then 380 seats would be gained, filling 19 classrooms, meaning we would have 508 seats additional. And you see the cost there, and that again is fully staffing the building with all new staff and classrooms, which we would not be able to fill this time. All right, our last one is option D2, and this was building early childhood school number 4 using our current model that we have in the other 3 campuses, where we have special education classes, PPCD, which is preschool program for children with disabilities. We do have some half-day programs there and also some full-day classes. So again, it's just taking exactly the model we have in the other campuses. That adds 120 full-day seats. And then adding our 128 from option A would bring us to 248 additional seats. The cost for that model is listed here, and of course you'll see the asterisk beside several items here because it would be staffed to meet the special education program needs. We'd have diagnostician, PPCD, speech language pathologist, and the other early childhood schools are staffed with 2 front office staff instead of the 1. That's why the staffing cost is a little more in D2 than in D1. So our updated summary of option D2 is, again, adding our 128 seats from option A, and this adds 120 new full-day seats, totaling 248. You see the one-time and ongoing costs there for fully staffing the campus, and again, that would meet more than 100% of our target. So the next slide is just compiling all of those one more time. Just want to make a note on the third column there, option A plus C is based on 8 classrooms, so we might think of that, cutting those totals in half there at the bottom for a rough estimate. Any questions on this part?
I have I was playing with numbers as you're presenting, and there's another possible option, and that's A plus B plus C.
Okay.
So we're not touching on D1, kind of the back of the envelope, and I just did that now, so I may be wrong. But it looks like 4 classrooms plus renovation of kitchens. So I instead of estimating it 3.38, then maybe it's 4 million, maybe even over 4 million. But with the initial startup cost of B, we're still going to be at about 4.5 million, give or take, for implementing all 3 options, initial cost. And then the operating cost, I'm looking at 360 from option B, plus 360 because we only have 4 classrooms for option C. So that's a total of 720,000 annual. And if my math is right, then we are going to be 299 seats over the target.
Okay, I'll take your word for it.
I may be wrong, I just did it now. So just something to think about.
Okay.
Well, I think one point of clarification on option B, this is just the estimate for adding 4 classrooms on existing campuses. If we can add 8
Correct.
classrooms on existing campuses and double the capacity. So I think when you're talking about looking at the number of seats to meet, that's an unlimited number, I think. That's just all that is captured is by the size of our schools.
Correct. Wherever there would be an empty classroom, we could potentially look
Right.
at expanding a pre-K. And all of those on that slide, the campus names, at first brush, seem to have an open space.
And transportation would have to be considered
Right.
in that, because we don't want to be putting
Yes.
kids on buses for long periods of time.
Correct.
So I have a question about the 20-to-1, because that seems to be the linchpin of these particular strategies. What experience do we have with 20-to-1 in preschool?
It's 20 to 2,
I'm sorry,
2
20 to 2.
adults and 20 students. Susanna might could speak better to this. Our ratio currently is 16 to 2. It has been 18 to 2 in the past. We gathered from the conversation the board entertained last time that 20 seemed like that might be the maximum. Of course, it would be better if we don't go to 20 or exceed that. A smaller ratio is always better. And that's one thing I know Susanna worked hard on as she was placing the students from the wait list. She tried really hard to continue to keep things even across the district as long as it was a location that met the needs of the family. So that's something she would continue to do, and I neglected to emphasize that part of the wait list slide. I was so excited to tell you we placed them all. For the remainder of the year, she will centralize the management of that wait list so that if we have students who come into a campus that is at capacity, that information will go straight to Susanna, and she will work to place them in a place where we do have openings. And then next year, we'll be working to develop a more centralized intake process and a different way to keep that information. So, sorry, I got sidetracked from your question.
But we don't have any current experience in Plano doing a 20 to 2?
No, not currently.
Okay.
At all of our.
We have Head Start.
Well, all of our peer districts staff at 22 to 2, and there is not a state cap. We could go up to 22 technically. Early or Head Start program is 19 to 2, that's federal. And really the qualifier for Head Start or for students that have a higher economic disadvantage need than students that are qualifying at the state program. We've had that in our district for years, and it's a full-day program, and we've had great success with it. I think our first stopping point would try to be around 19, but if we had a student that came in, let's say September or October, we would need to make the decision if that was the best option for the family to serve them, and we needed to go up to 20, that we would have the flexibility to do so, but that we would continue to work with our families one-on-one once we get to where we're down to one seat left.
I think it'd probably benefit us to run the numbers at, the 18 and the 19, because we're counting on the capacity of doing 20 in every classroom. And since we have no experience doing it ourselves, and since we pride ourselves on being better than peer districts, I think that's just a concern. As I recall the conversation last meeting, it wasn't let's go to 20 to 2. It was sort of a grimace if we'd have to do 20 to 2. I didn't get the idea that was going to be an underpinning for our strategy. So that's.
Well, and again, part of our presentation was applying option A to all options. Since 20 was mentioned as a ceiling, that's just what we chose to do for the numbers for tonight.
And secondly, we're counting a lot on capacity in an area that's been very volatile. When you look at the 3 schools in the Southwest Quadrant, between Huffman, Mitchell, and Rose Hager, we're counting on having 120 seats there using the 20 to 2. Those campuses all vary widely. I understand there's going to be more work done looking at the apartments and how many students come to us in a given year, which fluctuates widely. We also need to look at what we're considering as our functional capacity. For all the years I've served on this board, we always used 85%. We went through 2 vicious high school rezonings and a couple of elementary rezonings, and those were the numbers we used. If we're deciding to make things a little tighter for ourselves, moving up to 90%, I think that's a conversation that needs to happen in front of the board with some explanation as to why. Because there are a number of those schools. Last year, Mitchell, I think, had 800 students. Right now, they have 667 students. Who knows what it's going to be in 2 weeks? There's a lot of volatility going on. So if we're going to base our strategy on 120 seats down there, that worries me. And I think the numbers that you study on the apartments will also give you pause.
And
Well,
I think,
excuse me, go ahead.
well, I think with the guiding principles, we gave ourselves some flexibility, and if you look at the next last bullet, it's considering more than just the functional capacity. We certainly would look at the campus mobility, we would look at the enrollment, the trends for that campus, and certainly lower that functional capacity if it's one of the campuses where we see peaks in enrollment and it's up and down. I think to say it has to be 85, or it may need to be 80, it might need to be 75. So we kind of have to look at the whole picture. What existing programs do they have? What does transportation look like? What is enrollment trends? We actually we would need to walk the building to see what's there. So there's a lot of factors beyond just the functional capacity of a building. That would be our step one.
It just seems that it's gone from 85 to 90 with no discussion at the board table, which is changing something we've done for a long time.
And Randy, I don't know, do you want to address that? Because we've looked into that.
Sure. So we did visit with the demographer on that last week. First, the functional capacity I thought was a number that the demographer was coming up, but it is not. It is one that the district supplied. And so the district calculated the capacity on each campus. But as Dr. Williams was saying, really all that we're using that for is kind of like a red alert that when we start approaching 90% capacity, then it's time to evaluate, is this a campus that's at risk of going over capacity or is it not? Because also, as Dr. Williams said, there are no 2 campuses that are the same. And so some of them you can have 100% capacity because you've got 22 students in primarily every classroom. Others that have a lot of special ed programs, for example, bilingual ESL, have pulled out in small class size. They have a much lower functional capacity. And so as we get into looking at that a campus is approaching its capacity, that's when we go out and we actually see what that campus's functional capacity is, because it varies widely depending on the programs that are on that campus.
So what I think I'm hearing all of you say is that there are a number of variables to consider, and that picture is different, probably campus to campus or region, geographic region to geographic region, and you would develop a solution to meet the need based upon your assessment of how all of those variables play with one another to develop the best alternative solution for that need. That's what I think I'm hearing.
think it's really important to remember that, and we have been having this conversation pretty deeply in the last 2 weeks especially, is that a campus that has enrollment spikes and dips, that are up and down, that is actually not the same thing necessarily as mobility. And so, you can have a campus with 20% mobility that starts the year and ends the year with exactly the same number of kids. But what happened in between, with all the kids moving in and out, is an enormous amount of work on not only the processing of an enrollment side, but the education of the student side, and what those kids might need because they're coming and going during the school year. But an enrollment spike is actually quite different, because though that might not necessarily even be tied to mobility. One year you could have a high number of kids, and the next year you have a low number of kids. Could be because they raise the rates on rentals and different things like that, and those kids show up one year and none of them show up the next year. And so the capacity at the campus issue is, you can have all of that going on at the very same time. And so the campuses that have high enrollment peaks and valleys and high mobility, those are the ones that are the trickiest to predict, and where you don't want to say it's 85 or it's 90, because it's hard to tell, and you really have to study the trends of all the different numbers over time to be able to decide, is that a good place to have a program or grow a program, or that's not a good spot for us. We need to serve those kids in other ways, whether it's a campus nearby that becomes a satellite for that campus in order to leave room. And I just think, like we said, there's so many factors, and they're not all the same. Even though it sounds kind of like they are the same, they're really very, they can be very different and have different impacts on the schools. So I just want to keep all that in mind of, when we're trying to decide option B and where those things would go. We just have to be really careful about looking deeply at each factor before we make a decision to say, we'll put one there.
And I would say that also goes to option A, where we have campuses now, because once you do the assessment, as you're going to with the apartments down there, you may decide that Mitchell is not long-term viable.
That is
And
possible.
we need to say that. So at what point will that analysis be completed or shared for you to have your assessment of which campuses are long-term viable?
Well, I don't know that we can say that it's long-term. I think we have to look, when does the need become available, and then what's the status then of the campus? Because we could decide today that the ones that are underlined on that slide, that's our long-term first plan. 5 years may go by, and now things have changed, and those were really not the best sites. So I think for us, it's being diligent to understanding where the needs are for our district, and before we add, that we've looked at some historical data and making those decisions along the way. So when we started out with the presentation the August 21st, we had identified those campuses that had potential space, and we highlighted the ones that have existing pre-K units or satellite classrooms currently there. And then for today's presentation, we underlined the ones that would be kind of our first starting point to expand as of today. That could change in a year or two, but that would be our starting point today if we needed to expand.
Well, my question is even earlier than that in the process, where we pick 3 campuses in the Southwest Quadrant that have pre-Ks right now. I don't even know 5 years, but in 2 years or in 3 years, can we still count on those? And so, do you feel comfortable with the assessments you've done to date, that you can count on Mitchell for next year and the year after, or have you not yet had opportunity to dig in that deeply on that?
Well, I think if we move to the very last section of the presentation, we can look at the maps, and the maps section will look at our current, who we are in our current, what we look like today, and then it looks at option B and what that would look like with regard to where our needs are. So if we can take a look at that, maybe that'll help.
So one piece of the guiding principles already says functional capacity will be considered as a starting point. So I think we've at least documented that in our guiding principles.
So Susanna will take the next part, where we'll look geographically to see where the needs are the greatest. and where our current classes are, how to address the expansion possibilities. So you do have a handout called Key for your maps. You might want to get that out in your magnifying glass. I know that the numbers and words are very small, but Susanna will take over.
Thank you, Dr.
Who identified this color as peach, by the way, not orange? Because that was definitely not a man thing.
That was probably me. Depends on the monitor you're looking at
Yeah.
the time.
Good evening. So at our last meeting, there was a request to create a visual that showed a little bit of the areas where our greatest needs were, where we had facility availability. And so we've gone ahead and attempted to do that in several maps. I'll go ahead and start with map number 1. There we go. Okay, just a broad overview. These are the attendance zones by elementary campuses divided, and we've color-coded all of the campuses by their percentage of economically disadvantaged. So this is labeled map 1 and attendance zone map by economically disadvantaged. The 2 pink campuses, they're centrally located, are at 85% or above in economically disadvantaged numbers. That's Meadows and Mendenhall in their attendance zones. The peach, also known as pink, is the range from 70 to 84% of the economically disadvantaged. We have at the top there Barron at 84%, Memorial also at 84%. All the way to the east is Foreman at 82, and then Central is Sigler at 77, and then North Central Thomas at 71%. The blue are the campuses that are from 55 to 69% of economically disadvantaged, with Huffman, our furthest west blue, at 68%, Jackson down at the bottom 63, right above them is Weatherford at 61%, and then very centrally located is Christie at 59%. And then the green are our campuses that go from 36 to 54% of economically disadvantaged, starting with Razor up at central top, 53%, Dooley to the east at 51%, Mitchell down in the southwest quadrant at 50%, and then Daffron at 43%, Davis also in the middle at 41%, and Rose Hager down at the bottom at 38%. So that's a quick glance at the red is the highest number of economically disadvantaged, then peach, blue, and green.
Susanna?
These were, yes.
I'm sorry, please.
These were based on the August, the newest numbers that just came out August of 2018. Yes, ma'am.
My question is, I know that Title I is 40%, Supper is 50%. Is there any other state or federal requirement that we rank our campuses by percentage of ED versus the number of ED students?
I don't know that.
I don't have exactly the answer, but I can research that. But I do know that we're required to use percentage for some part of the equation on how we figure out.
Yeah, so Title I, you have to rank order your campuses from the highest percentage to the lowest, and you give an allotment that is per student on a campus, per at-risk student on a campus. So dollars, the higher the number, the more the dollars, but the amount per student has to be the highest on the highest percentage campus.
Okay, so that's one set of funding that, as we came to learn this year, Title I is not as big as we all thought, and so when we did sort of the reallocation on that, we ended up with fewer Title I employees. I think that was something we did. So my question...
That's because, I'm sorry, we've been using carryover funds.
Okay.
Roll forward.
So that's one thing we have to do by percentage, and I can understand that. But as we look at what our high-need campuses are, we have more economically disadvantaged students in blue and green colors than we often have in the pink and peach. When you just look at the number, Mendenhall ends up number 1 by both percentage and by number of economically disadvantaged students at 530 students because it's a bigger campus. But then you look at Meadows, which is also in our pink, our high category. Well, it drops down to number 6 when you look at the number of students in economic need. And so I would really like us to be more open-minded. If it's not a federal or state requirement and it's just us deciding how we're going to allocate the resources that we have purview over, I don't want to disadvantage students. Like at Mitchell, it's a big school. And because it's a big school, you think, well, their percentage isn't as high. Well, they have more kids in need than many of our central and east campuses. So I don't understand why we can't open the construct a little bit.
So for Title I, so we rank order by percentage, but then there's a per pupil expenditure. So let's just say, and we have to give our highest rank so that you're balancing the percentage and the number. Let's just say it's $100 per student. That's going to be then calculated on the number of students, so that you're basically getting $100 per every student that you've identified within that percentage. And so, so really you're using both, like Randy said, when we do all of our Title I allocation.
But this is going beyond Title I. This is us making a decision to spend our own district money to provide full day for economically disadvantaged children. And so I want to make sure we're paying attention to the biggest populations. If all of our elementary schools were the same size, you could use the percentage and the answers would come out the same. But when we have schools that widely differ in their enrollment, and we're allocating our dollars, not federal dollars, to me, it's just blatantly unfair, and it's caused us to under-resource schools, particularly in the Southwest Quadrant, for years, as you compare them to their peers.
So as we look at map number 3, does this not address that very concern? Because what we're talking about, I think, for the purposes of this presentation, is unmet need for children who qualify in the pre-K program, right?
Yes.
So map 3, I think Tammy addresses that concern that you bring up. You want to make sure we're not losing a count, of children by, it's not hidden or something behind this percentage figure. So, as an example, Bethany, which is in the white, so it's less than 35%. There are 7 children there who have an unmet need. There are 8 at Hedgecox. And that's more than the 4 at Jackson.
Correct.
Right? So I think this chart kind of might get at that concern that you're sharing with regard to unmet need. It's not the same thing as children that have need. It's the unmet need in this particular program of pre-K. So I think this chart will help in that analysis, to figure out, where do they live, and where do I have space so I can make an intelligent decision around placement, program placement and capacities.
Yes, and we get several layers in as we get through the map. So we'll go ahead. The mobility that is on map number 1 was the same mobility listed at the last August 21st presentation. And then the numbers, the tiniest numbers at the bottom were just the numbers of pre-K economically disadvantaged students. So for example, let me take one that's easier to read. Mendenhall, pre-K economically disadvantaged students total that we served last year was 64. Out of those, we served 50 of them in full day. So that's the tiniest numbers. That'll be represented in a graph as well in just a moment. On map number 2, this is, once again, so we've kept the colors there, but we're adding the layer now of the yellow rectangles are where we currently have pre-K programs. So the campuses that you have become aware of.
So, Tammy, I think to your point, to me, this map is more instructive than map 3 is really, because what this shows is where we are currently using our resources. And you can see, for example, you've got a cluster of schools in central Plano plus Isaacs, or in old downtown.
East.
You've got the north central cluster of schools with Thomas, Christie, and Pearson, and then you got the southwest quadrant with 6 different campuses. So, I mean, to your point about numbers, I think I agree with you that we need to be mindful of that, but I see that through this map.
Don't disagree with that, but and this is sort of a long-term burr under my saddle. We've had a historic philosophy of assigning resources by percentages, and if it's not required by any state or federal program, I want us to be more open-minded than that. If it's our money that we're allocating, let's put it on the highest need in terms of number of kids, because their kids are not percentages.
And I think that was also included in as a follow-up item that will be forthcoming as far as plan of work.
look at how we're allocating resources.
Okay, so with map number 3, this takes that one chart that we looked at last time and actually makes it a visual. So there are many numbers on here. Each elementary campus has a small orange circle above it with a number in it. And that's the number, like President Bender said, of students that we still need to serve in that school's attendance zone to be able to meet our planning target of 70% from each campus. Now, at first sight, when you also see, for example, the easiest one, or here in the central area, Christie, Houston, Wells, Sagling Davis, all of the campuses that had 10 or more students that we still needed to serve have the large orange circle around them. So you see here, there's 2 in the west, Mitchell and Brinker. More in the central, up at the north is Razor, across the middle, Wells, Houston, Christie, Sagling Davis, Weatherford, and down south is Aldridge. And then on the east side is Barron, Dooley, and last over in the corner is Shell. So that you're able to see the numbers there. And like Mr. Stoley was saying, or I'm not sure who was saying, that there are several up in the top quadrant there, obviously, that are not Title I, that we still need to serve a handful from each campus. If you're looking at the map, the data, there's a graph that was sent as a handout. And it's blue and gray. It's titled the 17-18 Full Day Participation and Target. There you go. Thank you. It's pulled up on the screens. What this shows by campus as well is, for example, the first bar is Barron, and we were able to serve 8 students from Barron who are economically disadvantaged in our full day, which includes Head Start. And then the gray section there shows that we still need to serve 31 more students in our full day, if that's our belief, to meet that 70% of the campus. So when looking across the board, you see our areas of bigger need. Barron has 31, Razor has 26. After that comes Dooley and Mitchell with 16. And that is a kind of a combination of maps 1 and 3. So you're able to see, based on their percentage, how many actual numbers we still need to serve.
Okay, so step back and help simple-minded people here.
No.
Okay, 70% of last year's kindergarten enrollment is our target for this current year's pre-K need. Is that
Correct.
Kindergarten need.
Yes, correct. Kindergarten
Economically
need.
disadvantaged.
Yes, economically
Okay, I just wanna
disadvantaged.
make sure I'm on the
Yes.
right page. Okay, thanks.
Yes, we always have to plan somewhat backwards because they're the first class.
So for the other information, we did that as a district. The 823 is a district, but this now, as we took every single campus and their percentage of low income on their kindergarten class numbers, that's where we came up with these.
So do you just know offhand, I know you have it somewhere, I'm just not remembering it, the total of the gray by, so are these east, central,
Yes.
and west based upon which feeder pattern? The feeder pattern for early childhood or the feeder pattern for
Let's see.
it's everything thereafter?
Everything.
You
got
I can
Weatherford.
tell you now, Weatherford is in central. So this is based on feeder pattern, I believe, the high school feeder pattern.
High school feeder pattern.
Yes, because Weatherford goes to Biggie, but here's
You're
East
gonna
Central,
pull
so
out
high school feeder.
Weatherford.
So can you just, do you know offhand what the total of the gray numbers is by
I do.
each of those?
I do, and it's
categories?
on slide A, no, under option A. The west need is 67 total.
Mhm.
The central need is 139. And east is 109.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay. I believe, there we go. Okay, so one more layer to our maps. We have map number 4. This is, again, as we've mentioned, this is at a quick glance the green rectangles are where we believe we would have capacity at our current elementary campuses. So now, these are the same that were on option B slide that Dr. Hasley presented. So now we have a combination of the greens in the background have availability. The large orange around the name is where the biggest needs are. Again, if we were to decide to go with any of these campuses, if this option is selected, we'd do a walkthrough, like several have said, talking to the principals, considering the factors on the pre-K guiding principles.
Carrie, back to your original question, so Hager would be an add down in the quadrant, Jackson, Beatty, Weatherford.
And I get Jackson, that's a really, really big elementary school, but as recently as last year, we were worried that we only had room for one early childhood in Hager. And so, I mean, really, really volatile in that quadrant. And if we're going to base a strategy on it, that does worry me.
Okay. And then map 5 is truly just a quick stab at looking geographically where our biggest needs are. Some of the campuses that may be considered, bless you, may be considered for expansion at elementary campuses. So just trying to cluster enough students to create 1 to 2 classrooms based on where there may be availability.
So are these the purple box?
Yes, ma'am.
Option 2?
Yes, of the green, the ones that have turned purple are now those that would,
First look.
yes, at first glance, yes, very,
So the children in Northwest Plano
mhm.
would be positioned at Thomas or Razor?
Right.
Okay.
Northeast, well,
North Central. Yes, and Razor obviously would be a new campus. They have 26 students that we still need to capture to
Just in their own attendance zone?
In their own attendance zone, yes.
So,
Yes. Now, if we, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
If we were to open Razor, for example, that would pull some of the students that are at Pearson's full day
Okay.
out of there to help meet the needs of other campuses. So that's kind of the tricky part is when you pull, you're creating space as well.
Also, I'd say even though Brinker's Circle is fairly high, unless the Shops of Legacy have started to transition, those children probably live in that little reverse L down at the bottom where all those
Mhm.
apartments are. Brinker's actually further south, but the kids who probably ED are in that bottom little L.
So I greatly appreciate this because A, I'm a visual guy, and B, I like the supply and demand. Yeah, I mean, that's the only way you can do real cost benefit analysis, to see what we need to do here and really develop a strategy. So let me ask you some strategy questions. So let's take Sigler, for example. So Sigler is one that's identified as potential expansion space. With the idea is the strategy that you look at this and say, well, I've got a need at Aldridge and I've got a need at Shepherd. I can expand in Sigler and cover those 2 elementary campuses as well.
Correct, and because Sigler currently has pre-K, we can simply add 1 there and it's not a teacher by herself, him or
Right.
herself.
Yeah, okay, good. And then the kind of the quad in the middle of Davis, Sagling, Wells, and Houston, those were the ones where the need was 10 plus, but it's also, the numbers aren't huge coming out of those. And so it looks like the suggestion is perhaps to go to Christie and add on, and then to Weatherford to the south. And is the idea you can service those 4 campuses out of those expansions at Wells, Weatherford, and Christie?
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, because Thomas and Razor would take care of that kind of north central.
So when I went through this stuff, and I greatly appreciate all of this because to me the logic makes sense. I get it, and I understand exactly what you're talking about here. When I went through, I looked at I broke all the campuses into what those that have capacity and those that don't, because that's really kind of drives the conversation as to construction costs when you run out of capacity. And so where I see the issues with regard to capacity are with a Mendenhall, for example, where you've got, we're meeting 70% already. And it does not have space. There are schools around it that we could potentially expand into. So I would think that's the way we would meet that need there. Is that, and whoever is running the pre-K program at Mendenhall is doing a phenomenal job to get that many kids already signed up for this thing. So put them on the rest of the campuses too, whoever's doing that. But the other two, you know, kind of going back to Tammy's comments about this southwest quadrant, Huffman and Mitchell are both out of capacity. They're high targets because there are a lot of numbers, and they have high participation rates. Now, they're not full yet, but I look at expansion at Hager, Jackson, Weatherford, potentially Beatty. Would those be the immediate relief
Yes.
providers?
Yes.
Okay. That's it for me.
Just another reminder, we do still have open seats in pretty much across the district. You know, as I mentioned before, we only have 2 classes now that are at 19 and 1 at 18. So we do have, even if we just go to 18, we've still got some seats in a lot of areas that we're working to try to find kids to fill.
Well, and I think, that gets to this option A, right? We're going to increase the class size so that we can accommodate more kids. As we fill those up, then we're going to look to expand this program into other available spaces in our current campuses. And then if we fill that up, and again, I'd go back to the last meeting, you know, I'm interested in looking at this long term for more than just economically disadvantaged kids. If we have the capacity and the ability to create this program for all kids, I think it would be beneficial. So that said, you know, the idea is use your existing space before you need to, in my mind, go and construct something, right? What I see here, I like from my perspective, because it does just that. It utilizes the existing space that we have, and we will maximize that space out before we look to adding.
I would add something more. Again, we look at options A, B, and C potentially. There's no contradiction between deploying them. And I think we don't need to go to option A all the way, for example, so we may not want to go all the way to 20-2 initially. There are options at option B for expansion. There are options at option C for expansion. I would say if we consider all 3 of them viable and say, as you see needed in the most cost-effective way, start using all 3 options, A, B, and C, as needed in the appropriate areas until we get, I mean, heck, if my numbers were correct, then we have a potential of 299 over our target.
So for purposes of this particular presentation that we've received, we've heard some guiding principles that we asked staff to go off and develop based on feedback from the board. We have reviewed those. We have reviewed updated options in count, and you know, we have an understanding of where we have need, where we have supply, where we have demand, and so forth. So this is an action item as far as the guiding principle adoption process is concerned. So in terms of a path forward, what if we consider, you know, that particular question in just a moment, and then I think, Sarah, you've heard some feedback about variety and hybrid and so forth. Would that give you enough information to then put together your best plan of how to execute, deliver on the guiding principles, given all of the options here, pick and choose as appropriate? And, as the capital needs are indicated based upon maximizing participation and so forth, then I would presume you would bring that back to the board, and, help us understand what your action plan is based upon the feedback that you've heard. Is that reflective of what the board wishes?
I actually want to ask my colleagues, do we want a strategy based on 20 to 2?
I would say, I'll kind of repeat, I know that I may not have been very clear. I would say I would probably be in favor of building another classroom either in an existing early childhood school or in an existing school when we're at 18 to 2 or maybe 19 to 2, before we take, whether it's option A, B, or C, take it all the way to 20 to 2 before we do something else. So I would say balance the two. Start with maybe a target of 18 to 2, and when we run out of 18 to 2 with option A, start with option B, start with option C, and then we go to 19 to 2 and 20 to 2 at the end, if we ever get to the need of being 299 over target.
Is there a way to put, how the state says 22 to 1 in K through 4? Is there a way to put in our guiding principles some kind of a internal application for waiver? Because as you explained, some campuses could work with a 20 to 2, whereas some campuses couldn't work beyond a 16 to 2. It's kind of more of a campus need. So maybe put something in here that says, yes, we recognize 20 to 2 as a max, but as needed per campus, and maybe have, if you're talking about 18, I mean, these are kind of arbitrary numbers. Head Start is 19. I would start there and then say anything beyond that, we need to have a conversation, like we approve waivers that go to the state.
Do we treat this very similar to the way that we're talking about functional capacity, where our max is 20 to 2, but when we get to 18 to 2 or 19 to 2, that's kind of a watch? You put that campus on a watch, or you put that to see if we need to add another classroom into that building, or if we need to, I'm not talking about construction, I'm talking about just adding another class. But, look, I'm okay starting with 20 to 2 as a max, Tammy, to answer your question directly. If it's going to cause a degradation of the program, if that's the concern, then I would want us to be very careful about hitting that 20 to 2 and keeping it there. Again, it's a delicate balance, because I'm the one up here saying I want every kid I can get into that program, and I do.
I would say, since we don't have any mandatory requirements to approve this, I would leave this to the administration and tell them that our guidance is try and stay at 18 to 2, and we will approve extensions along the lines of options A, B, and or C. And wherever you feel that you need to go beyond 18 to 2, the max will be 20, but whenever you feel that there is a justified need to go between 18 to 2, just go above 18 to 2.
I would even go to 19 on that.
Or 19, whatever the number
Dr.
is.
Williams let us know that Head Start, which is a federal program, is talking about higher need, so.
Yeah, no, I just 19, I'm fine with 19 too. I'm just saying, if there is no mandatory requirement for us to approve this, I would leave this to the administration.
Head Start is a little different because they have such extra support wrapped around those children, and so that's why they can probably tolerate the higher one. I certainly would hope, as you run your numbers in a more detailed way, as you start to look at each campus and how they fluctuate, to run some numbers based on 18 to 2, because I don't want to have our whole strategy based on taking it to the max of what we feel at all comfortable with. I would also say I think the wording to me is not strong enough in terms of not having a solo pre-K teacher in classroom. And the scenario that was expressed was, if you don't have enough kids on that campus, if you only have 15 kids on that campus, then you just have one classroom there. That's not our case in most of these places. And so, for example, Mitchell, last year, they were asked if they could go down to only one classroom on campus because their overall campus had gotten large enough they needed the space. And so that was a decision we were making almost for our own convenience. It wasn't about not enough need there. So I really want to make sure that we understand that having a Lone Ranger is not optimal for any sort of educational experience. And even having them work with the kindergarten teachers, I mean, there's dramatic differences in the educational and emotional development of the children. So I would want to strengthen the language about whether we're going to have a single classroom on the campus.
That's the third bullet under the fourth star.
Yes.
I think in this case, sort of like what you shared just a minute ago, I believe that all of us, and I would put the administrators in this category, are concerned about having a high quality program with high quality employee experiences. And I'm not the expert in that. I feel like I can say I value that. I want our employees to have that shared experience, that camaraderie, that collaboration, and so forth. But I don't know that there's a formula we can always apply to say, always do X in every situation, because there might be variables that I just don't know about. So, you know, I don't want to overmanage for every particular situation. I want to provide direction in the guiding principles to say, this is what we value. Do the best you can, please, to respect this value. And I think the last guiding principle has to do with making sure it is a high quality program and evaluating that. I can't remember if it says every year or something like, but making sure that it's, you know, evaluated. So, and that's just my feedback about, I just don't want to overmanage you, because I'm not the expert. I trust that you are the expert. We can ask the questions to get, you know, did these teachers have a good experience collaborating with each other on campus, off campus? I'd like to have a partner there, but if it's going to cost, what does it cost for another teacher? $90,000. That's a very big nut right there. So if I've got 16 kids, do I want 2 classrooms of 8? That's expensive. So, you know.
I think the important thing you said, Missy, is the highest quality, but we have to trust, and you've not done anything but deliver us the highest quality in this presentation. So I trust that you all make the decisions that are best for each campus, for each student, for each family.
How about if what we do is we approve options A, B, and C at 4 classrooms at full, giving us the potential of maximum 299 over our target, and let you manage it to the best quality we can.
But what I would like is at least some reporting on that, because I know there's a new sheriff in town, a couple new sheriffs in town, so things may be done differently. But I don't want pressure put on individual principals to make decisions because of cost that are not in line with what we hope to have for these children. So if you do end up with a singleton on a campus, I think at least in a board update, we should be told that. If we are going to have 19 or 20 to 2, we should be told that, because even in the telling will make everyone think a little more carefully about whether that's what you want to do.
Definitely do that. And just to add one more thing, I mean, these are guidelines, so we wanted them to be flexible, but at the last meeting, we had talked about expanding and really looking at the tuition based. And so our thoughts were, if we have a need where it's not a high economic disadvantaged area, but it's an area where we do want to start to expand the tuition based, we may only have enough students for, you know, starting out that we would only have 1 class. And so that was the reason of adding that we'll do everything possible to try to add where there's either existing pre-K classrooms, or as we're building new sites, that we would start out small with the hope that they'll build. And so just allowing for some flexibility there.
Okay. Well, I think that this is a very good presentation with detailed data. And I agree with Yorm. I agree that we, and Missy, that we do need some flexible guidelines so that they can have flexibility. You know, we let the professionals take care of, you know, guiding us to the right capacity, the right functional capacity for each classroom. So I agree with you, Yorm, that we should have flexible guidelines, and that maybe we should consider actually 18 to 2.
So Couple of thoughts. In the plan of work, when you're working on that, can you incorporate some of these reporting requests that we've received through the board update? And, you know, I'll trust you to figure out when, so we can see those things coming through here. And tonight, Yorm, the only thing that we're considering that's posted is are the guiding principles.
Right.
So I think with the feedback that you and others have shared, Sarah, you can work with staff to figure out what assembly of options you would like to proceed with, and bring us any, you know, those things that, let us know how that assortment looks, and bring to us any capital improvement requests associated with that.
I just wanted to comment, I just did the math, and if we implemented A, B, and C to the fullest extent, we're going to be not just 100% plus of our target, we're going to be 36% above our target. So that's pretty significant.
Okay. All right, so may I have a motion related to the guiding principles?
I move that the Board of Trustees approves the guiding principles related to the pre-kindergarten planning in Plano ISD as presented.
And do I have a second?
Second.
I third.
Jerry Beach. I have a motion by Nancy Humphrey, a second by Jerry Chambers, that the Board of Trustees approve the guiding principles related to pre-kindergarten planning in Plano ISD as presented. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we will now proceed to vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Motion passes unanimously, 7-0. Thank you. All right. All right, item A2 is an item that was originally pulled from the consent agenda by Dr. Solomon. It's related to revisions to the Student Code of Conduct. Dr. Solomon, would you like to begin the discussion, or would you like Susan to kick it off?
Let me just frame why I asked this to be removed. This is an item that, it's an item that relates to bullying. The majority of changes to the Code of Conduct is related to bullying and other activities happening in school. And there was one paragraph that really caught my eye, and it really made my daughter very happy, because last year my daughter came home and said that another student told her that she should go and kill herself. And he was doing that on a daily basis. Fortunately, she didn't take it seriously, but that paragraph that caught my attention was that the district may place in DAEP, that there's a typo there, a student who engages in bullying, and it gets to that encourages a student to commit or attempt to commit suicide. And I think that that's one of the problems that we're facing. So I'd like if you can, Susan, give us some background overall on the changes for the Code of Conduct.
Sure. This is the final step in our process after putting the associated policy changes in place related to David's Law. Putting this into our Student Code of Conduct actually puts those policies into practice at our campuses. And as you said, Dr. Solomon, this really addresses serious bullying offenses and gives campuses some added discretionary placements in either a DAEP or expulsion for bullying offenses that rise to that level.
Okay. So thank you for that description. And may I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Trustees approve the revisions to the Student Code of Conduct.
And do we have a second?
I second.
All right, we have a motion from Yorm Solomon, a second by Nancy Humphrey, that the Board of Trustees approve revisions to Student Code of Conduct. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we will now proceed to vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Motion passes unanimously, 7-0.
Thank you, Susan.
Our next two agenda items for discussion and action support the district's goal to ensure efficient use of financial resources and budgeting. Item B1 is consider board approval of a resolution adopting the 2018-19 tax rate. Randy McDowell, he will introduce this resolution. Mr. McDowell.
Yes, thank you, President Bender, members of the board. Setting the tax rate is a process that started back in May, and back on May 27th was the first of two postings that we ran the notice of public meeting to discuss budget and proposed tax rate in the newspaper and posted on our website. The calculations that we did on the budget were based on a $1.17 M&O rate and 26.9 cents of the INS rate. Is that better? And on June 12th, that's the day that we had the public hearing on the budget and proposed tax rate. That is also the same night that we adopted the 2018-2019 budget. On July 19th of 2018, we received the certified taxable values. On August 7th, at that board meeting, the board approved the sale of bonds through a parameters order. And tonight we are here to adopt the tax rate. The current adopted rate, or the previous adopted rate for 2017-2018, again, was $1.17 M&O, 26.9 cents INS, for a total of $1.43.9. We did propose those same tax rates, again, for M&O and INS, so there's no change. On the next slide, we have the historical tax rates that the district has had all the way back to fiscal year '06. And we know back in those first 2 years, or the 05-06 is prior to tax rate compression. 06-07 was when it was bought down to $1.33 on the M&O. The next year in 08 is when it was bought down to $1 compressed rate. And from that point in time, it went up to $1.04, then up to $1.06. I'm sorry, up to $1.02, and then to $1.04, and then the TRE was passed. And the M&O rate has been the same since that point. The INS rate has been the same for the previous 4 years, and if you adopt that again tonight, that will be the 5th year at 26.9. The next slide shows the taxes on the average residence back to that same time period, fiscal year '06. Back in fiscal year '08, the tax on the average residence was just over $3,000. The average residence in Plano at that time was right at $250,000. And for the current year, in fiscal year '19, the average tax is just under $4,900 at those proposed rates. And the average residence is right at $377,000. And so that's the increase that we've seen in residence values over that time period. On the next slide, these are the districts that are in Collin County, and this is where we rank with our proposed rate. These are what we expect the districts to adopt for 18-19. And so with the M&O rate at $1.17, the INS rate at 26.9 for a total of $1.43.9, we are the next to lowest taxing entity as far as school districts go within Collin County. As we talk about what we like to call the state's recapture tax, this is a 5-year history that shows our total M&O taxes collected on the left side of each one of the bar graphs. In the blue, that represents the amount that the district gets to keep of that tax collection number on the M&O. The red is the recapture amount. And so we can see back in fiscal year 15, the total tax collections were $437 million for the $1.17 tax rate, and that has been consistent over this time period. The recapture was $45.2 million of that, and the district retained $391.8 million of that amount. We can see how that progresses up as far as recapture. And this coming year, that amount is projected to be $208 million. You're aware of that in the budget process. So total tax collections at $618.1 million projected. The district would keep $410 million of that, and again, recapture would be $208. And that's actually $7.6 million less than what we got to keep in fiscal year 18 or the prior year. So even though our values went up significantly, about 8.61%. Our recapture went up at a higher rate, and so the district is actually retaining less than the prior year.
Randy, I think to put a good round number on these, if you look at fiscal year 16 versus today versus 19, and you go back to your average taxes paid on a house, it's $1,000 more, $1,000 more paying on from 16 to 19, and yet we're keeping less. So if people want to know where their $1,000 is going to, it ain't staying here.
That's correct.
No argument?
No argument there. The next slide is very similar to the previous one. It might give you a better visual just how much that recapture amount is increasing in that red portion. But it represents the same values as the previous. This is a slide that gives us an actual breakout. So if we just take the $1.17 M&O tax rate, the amount that we actually retained of that $1.17 in fiscal year 15 was $1.49. So we kept just under 105 pennies of the 117 or the $1.17, and 12.1 of those cents went as recapture. For this coming year, we will only be retaining 77.6 pennies of that, and 39.4 cents of the $1.17 will be going as recapture, what we're calling the effective state tax rate for recapture. So again, that also represents, as you saw, recapture going up, but that just shows it in a different manner of the actual pennies that are being retained here at the local level. And so even though our taxpayers are seeing that their M&O rate is $1.17 paid to Plano ISD, that is correct, but the district does not retain that, and the state is the beneficiary of 39.4 of those pennies.
So the red part is what we could effectively call the hidden state property tax. It was 12 cents in 15. It is now 39 cents, so it's tripled in that period of time, and it is not called out in that fashion
That's correct.
in any of the required documentation that a school district must communicate to its tax base.
And that's all while the tax rate, our tax rate has remained the same.
And you said before that we collected more, but we don't see the benefit. If I remember correctly, looking at the numbers, it's not just that we don't see the benefit, but we collected more, or we will collect more this year compared to last year. We actually keep at M&O, we keep less than last year.
That's right, 7.6 million less on what we retained in the prior year.
And if I remember correctly, having the same discussion last year, if we decided that we wanted to go to the effective tax rate and reduce our rate so that we collect the same amount, it doesn't mean that the state doesn't increase what they're getting.
That's correct. So the wealth per watt is the one that's going up because that's based on the prior year value. That's what establishes the percentage of recapture, and then the amount that we collect is the amount that's applied toward. So yes, the state, the way the system is built, if the district were to reduce their taxes, it's not the amount that goes to recapture that comes off first. The state is already getting a certain percentage of that just based on our prior year wealth per weighted ADA.
So the hole we're going to have in our budget, if we did reduce to the effective rate, would be more than the 7.6 that we're currently seeing after keeping the same tax rate.
Absolutely, it'd be significantly more than the 7.6 in lost revenue.
I remember the
Net
numbers
revenue.
for last year. I don't remember seeing them for this year, but I asked Steve last year to model it, and the number was we were going to to lower the rate to the effective tax rate, keep the same amount of dollars or collect the same amount of dollars. We would have had to pay the state an extra 26.3 million. So we're not talking 7.6 million if we lower the tax rate.
That would be more this year because values went up.
Right.
Talking about effective tax rates with school districts is a red herring. This ridiculous language that we're going to have to read about the effective tax rate being an increase in taxes is absolutely ridiculous when, in fact, the amount of taxes that we are going to keep is a decrease of 1.85% over last year. This is smoke and mirrors.
It definitely is, and the biggest impediment to us being able to lower the tax rate is that. It's the recapture. The formula does not account for the recapture. And that's part of the reason we have taxparency, to give transparency to our taxpayers so they recognize this. And they see without the smoke, they see the real story.
And one of the things I remember you told us, I believe it was in June, or no, in the May board meeting, you described the cumulative deficit that we're going to see of $96 million by, I think it was the 21-22 school year, but or maybe even 2021. But if I remember correctly, because the formula looks at last year's growth, you know, we all want to have maybe our property values level off, but if they do level off, we're probably looking at another $40 million that the recapture grows without our ability to collect anything more. So that's another $40 million to our deficit.
Yes, that's right. So the $96, $98 million cumulative deficit was over 18, 19 and the 3 years following. And that's assuming an 8% property value growth continues. If values do flatten out at any point in time, or even over a couple of years, to just go to not growing at all, then yes, that would cost the district another $40 million for the year or the years that's spread over. That were not figured in that calculation.
But other than that, recapture is great.
Says the state.
Well, the sad thing is, school districts aren't going to be able to pay that liability of recapture for very much longer. And they've got to come up with a change. They've got to fix the system. That's what we're hoping for in this upcoming legislative session.
In statewide, that recapture number is projected to be, I believe, $2.685 billion for this coming fiscal year. It's growing at a very, very fast pace. Okay, when we talk about tax rates, you've referred to the effective rate, which really isn't even pertinent to school districts because it's the rate that generates the same amount of tax collections as the prior year, but doesn't take into account anything like recapture going up or state funding going down, or whatever the case may be. And so when we run that through the effective rate calculation, which applies to other governmental entities but really doesn't apply very well to school districts, our effective rate for both M&O and INS combined would be $1.36. That would be a significant decrease in revenue decrease from what we currently have. The tax rate necessary to maintain the same level of maintenance and operations revenue per student and paid debt service would be just over $1.48. However, we can't go to that because we're locked into the $1.17 M&O and we're locked into the INS rate that will pay our debt. And so the maximum we can go to is the rollback rate at $1.439, and so that's the $1.17 plus 26.9 cents. And we can't exceed that anyway without voter approval, either issuing additional bonds on the INS side, and we're locked in at the max, the cap on the M&O side already. So there's nothing we can do as far as increasing that. And our proposed rate was the same and continuing with the rates that we've had for the last 4 years of $1.17, 26.9 for a total tax rate of $1.439. Any other questions? Okay, if not, we do have 2 resolutions for your consideration tonight. The first of those is the one that's required under state law, Chapter 26 of the Code. And that is the standard one. It does have the language in there that talks about we are exceeding the effective tax rate by 5.4 something percent. And then we have the one that is the Plano ISD version that better explains where your tax dollars are going.
Randy, I have a question on this resolution. Is this required language by the state that we cannot deviate from?
That's correct. The first one, the state approved one, is the language that we're required under Chapter 26 of the code that we have.
And the code prohibits us from adding language to this resolution?
That would be a legal question.
Okay. I sure would like to know the answer to that.
Therefore, we have drafted a second
I
resolution.
get the second resolution, but I would like what the state's requiring us to do to be actually reflective of reality.
It's my understanding that we cannot deviate from this language.
And David, that's part of the ongoing taxparency work.
Yep.
So this is an example. So before we tackle this, is there anything, Superintendent, that you want to add?
I just wanted to say, I mean, I get the state is putting us in a position of the board having to make a statement, a legally binding statement, that is not reflective of reality. And so we just appreciate as an administration, the board considering reading 2 adoptions of resolutions this evening so that at least one of those resolutions reflects the truth of our reality in Plano ISD.
So for that purpose, Board Secretary Nancy Humphrey will read the first resolution, which is the state mandated solution as defined by law. Following that, we will then consider a second resolution that includes additional language that we believe provides what we call taxparency to the taxpayer so that they understand where every penny of their tax rate is going. In other words, who is the recipient of those funds, even though they write them to Plano ISD. So both of those would be considered in a single motion at the conclusion of Nancy having read both resolutions. So Nancy, do you read resolution, official resolution,
Okay,
number 1?
Here is the official state-required language. Plano Independent School District Resolution adopting 2018-2019 tax rate. Whereas on June 12, 2018, the Board of Trustees of the Plano Independent School District met in open session to hold a public meeting to discuss the budget and proposed tax rate for the year 2018-19, after which the budget was adopted. And whereas a tax rate for the year 2018 is required by the provisions of Section 26.05 of the Property Tax Code, and whereas the total tax rate consists of 2 separate rates, a debt service rate and a maintenance and operations rate, and whereas due to an increase of $57.4 million in state recapture taxes, the district finds it necessary to maintain the exact same maintenance and operations rate as the previous year in order to meet budgetary needs. And whereas the district is nevertheless required by Section 26.05 of the Property Tax Code to state that hereby this rate will raise more taxes for maintenance and operations than last year's tax rate, and the tax rate will effectively be raised by 5.46% and will raise taxes for maintenance and operations on a $100,000 home by approximately $0. Now, it is hereby resolved by the trustees of the Plano Independent School District that the tax rate for the year 2018-19 be set at $1.439 per $100 valuation, parentheses, $1.17 designated to maintenance and operations, and .269 or 26.9 cents designated to debt service, the said actual rate being the same as the previous year's actual rate, and further that taxes are hereby levied on all properties now or hereinafter on the rolls of said district for the year 2018-19. Adopted this 4th day of September 2018 by the Board of Trustees of the Plano Independent School District, President, Board of Trustees, Plano Independent School District Secretary, Board of Trustees, Plano Independent School District.
Thank you, Secretary Humphrey. Would you now commence with reading the second resolution, which is a little bit more descriptive?
Okay. This actually tells the story. Plano Independent School District Board of Trustees resolution adopting the 2018-2019 tax rate. Whereas the Board of Trustees of the Plano Independent School District, the district, has voted to adopt a tax rate including maintenance and operations expenditures and debt service that exceeds its total effective tax rate, And whereas the Board of Trustees is voting to adopt a maintenance and operations tax rate that, when applied to the total taxable value, imposes an amount of taxes to fund maintenance and operation expenditures of the district that exceeds the amount of taxes imposed for that purpose in the preceding year. And whereas Tax Code Section 26.05 requires that certain statements be included in the Board of Trustees resolution setting its tax rate and on its internet website when the Board of Trustees adopts a tax rate that, when applied to the total taxable value, imposes an amount of taxes to fund maintenance and operation and debt service expenditures of the district that exceeds the amount of taxes imposed for that purpose in the preceding year. And now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Trustees of Plano Independent School District adopts a state recapture tax rate of 0.39 or 39.4 cents that will result in a wealth equalization as required by the state. This state assessed tax rate is in accordance with subchapters A and D, Chapter 41 of the Education Code, and rules adopted by the Commissioner of Education as authorized by Section 41.006 of the Education Code to reduce Plano Independent School District's wealth per weighted student to a level that is not greater than the equalized wealth level as determined by the Commissioner of Education in accordance with Section 41.002 of the Education Code. And be it resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Plano Independent School District adopts a local maintenance and operations tax rate of 0.776 or 77.6 pennies of the amount of taxes needed to fund local maintenance and operation expenditures for the 2018-2019 fiscal year. And be it resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Plano Independent School District adopt a state and local maintenance and operation tax of $1.17 for the amount of taxes needed to fund maintenance and operation expenditures for the next year, and meet the wealth equalization state recapture tax assessed. And be it resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Plano Independent School District is adopting a tax rate of 0.269 for the amount of taxes needed to service the district's debt. And be it further resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Plano Independent School District is adopting a total tax rate of $1.439 for the year 2018-2019, comprised of the state's recapture, the district's maintenance and operations, and debt service tax rates as stated above, and is effectively a 5.46% increase in the tax rate, passed and adopted this 4th day of September 2018.
Okay, thank you, Nancy.
Can you read it again?
Not before I get a drink of water.
Do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Trustees approves the property tax rate be increased by the adoption of a tax rate of $1.439, which is effectively a 5.46% increase in the tax rate, but is actually a 1.85 decrease in M&O revenue retained by the district due to recapture.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion by David Stolley, a second by Nancy Humphrey, that the Board of Trustees approve the property tax rate to be increased by the adoption of a tax rate of $1.439, which is effectively, according to the state, a 5.46 increase in the tax rate. Is there any further discussion?
What about the extra? Is this part of your motion?
Yeah, I made the motion.
I seconded it.
Well, I don't have all that language. Okay. All right, so Sharon, do you have it? Do you want me to read it?
It's in here.
It's
I
in
can't
here.
repeat it, but I have it.
Okay, but you have it, all right. So just to elaborate further on the recitation of the motion in the second. David Stolley made the motion, Nancy Humphrey seconded to approve the property tax rate to be increased by the adoption of a tax rate of $1.439, which is effectively 5.46% increase in the tax rate, but is actually a 0.85% decrease in revenue retained by the district due to recapture. M&O revenue retained due to the recapture. Okay. Any discussion?
I have just one point I want to make, and it has to do about the INS, which, you know, we're really not focusing on that right now, but I just want to point out that the state of Texas guarantees eligible bonds issued by public school district and charter schools, which affords them a AAA rating. However, Plano ISD is one of only a handful of districts in the state that earns this rating on a standalone basis. I just wanted to point that out because we're good credit risk.
The other thing I want to point out is that the recapture rate, our obligation to the state, is 39.4 cents, and that is greater than our debt obligation of 26.9 cents. Any other discussion?
And it's greater than what a Plano resident or PISD resident pays Collin County and Collin College
Combined?
combined.
Right. Any other discussion? Hearing none, we will now vote. All in favor, please raise your hand. I know, it's a slow one. It's a slow raise.
Under duress.
Under duress.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously, 7-0.
News are on our next.
Under duress with no options.
All right, item B2 is for the board to consider approval to amend the contract CSP 2017-062 Fine Arts Center Construction Manager at Risk, guaranteed maximum price with McCarthy Building Companies. Randy McDowell, CFO, will present this item to the board. Randy?
Thank you, President Bember. So, sorry, this mic isn't working very well. So this is a two-part presentation. The first presentation we'll be giving by one of our architect firms, and so we have Perkins and Will, and we have Bora that are the architect firms on this project. So we have David McMillan and Wesley Thiel that are here with Perkins and Will, and I believe David is going to, or both of them are going to come and give the presentation. So this will be on the construction components, the schedule, the design standards, and the functionality. And then they will turn it back over to me where we'll look at students served, facility usage, the guaranteed maximum price, and the annual operating cost. So just so you know where to direct your questions to, and I will go ahead and turn it over to David and Wesley.
Okay. My name is Wesley Thiel. I'm a senior project manager with Perkins and Will. This is David McMillan, also with Perkins and Will. I have to say I appreciate seeing all the numbers and legal language. Hearing that today helped remind me why I became an architect. So I'm going to go home feeling a little better about my job. So thank you everyone for allowing us to be here this evening to present this. We are going to do a high-level overview of the project, where we've been. So if there's any questions during the presentation, I mean, we can answer those and stop where we're at. Otherwise, we'll answer questions at the end of the presentation. It's only 85 slides, so it's okay. I'm kidding. It's 10 slides, so we'll be pretty quick. We do have on our first slide the graph or I should say outline of the project to date. And then the last section is construction, which is where we're headed. It's not 3 months, it will be much longer than that. It will be, substantial completion is expected to be 2020, fall of 2020. But the important thing that I want to emphasize on this graph or on this outline of the process and of the schedule is how many times there were workshops and site visits that Plano ISD took part in with the design team. I mean, this is an exact reflection of how the project went. I would say this is about as close to perfect of a project timeline that we would ever want to do. We rarely, if ever, have a have a project that has a timeline like this because of the amount of workshops. We try to do that. This is the type of situation that leads to great projects. So that's commendable to Plano ISD for being heavily involved, not just at the beginning of the project, but all the way through every phase. It's important to be there at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. And again, I just can't say enough about Plano ISD for being involved in that and helping the design team really craft the project that we have today, and a really great project. Also noted on this timeline is the amount of cost estimation that was involved with the construction manager, McCarthy, who's also here with us today. I'll let David talk a little bit about that. He's been heavily involved in that.
So you can see the amount of tick marks on the graph that indicate cost estimation, and that's critical information that we receive, and we give it back to our consultants. But the amount of market fluctuation that takes place over the length of a design process of a project of this caliber is very volatile, and especially in this type of market, it's volatile. So McCarthy's cost estimation throughout the entire project has been very instrumental in how we arose at the final design that we are ready to go into construction. During the initial progress of the programming, we met with the district, like Royce said 12 times, and within those times, we developed a list of project goals. And those goals are reflected here, but how we'll kind of, like we said, go a high overview of some of those and how they establish themselves into the project.
Yeah, and I'll just make a couple extra comments as it relates to the cost estimation. Certainly everybody knows what the market is like in North Texas right now, so having a construction manager involved throughout the process has been really helpful for our design team. It's always important, but it's especially important, as David mentioned, with market conditions like they are, not just North Texas, but now nationally. So that's been really important, and it also gives us a good relationship heading into the construction with that construction manager and GC. So I think that's going to serve everyone well moving forward. As it relates to those workshops that were done and heavily in programming and then throughout the intermittent phases, we established project goals, and I say we, Perkins and Will, Bora, our design associate, who I forgot to mention at the beginning, who's not able to be with us today, but both our team, Bora, and Plano ISD established these project goals to really create a filter to run every design decision through as we moved forward in the project, and not just the beginning again, but all the way through the process. And I'm not going to go through each goal, but I wanted to highlight a few of the goals that we felt really maybe shined a little brighter in the end. But first, it's about, this project is about fine arts and elevating fine arts within the district. This project is going to be really, I would say, nationally recognized as it relates to fine arts because of the level and quality that this project is exemplifying. So first and foremost, that was the primary goal for this project, for the design team and for the district. Secondly, this project is going to serve all aspects of the district. As we have up on the screen, 70, if not more, more than 70 schools within the district. Everybody will be able to access and use this facility, and it's really going to set the stage for fine arts education and allowing students to pursue that career path, where many times that career path is not, it gets a little bit more relegated, I should say. Third, this is going to serve multiple areas of fine arts. It's not just theater, it's not just music, it's all of the fine arts. And once we get into the plan, the floor plan, we'll be able to show you how every single aspect or every single discipline within the fine arts was kept on an equal playing field. Fourthly, I got a couple more that we felt like were pretty important. One being an environmentally sensitive project. Perkins and Will and Bora is just at the forefront of what we do. It's not about getting a plaque on the wall, it's about doing the right thing and allowing for students to be able to have healthy environment in which to pursue their education. And that's integrated in different ways on the project, on the site, also in the materials that are chosen within the building. So moving on to the site, a few of the items related to that sensitivity was the siting of the building. And a couple things with the siting. One, we wanted to emphasize, and the district wanted to emphasize, the connection to the outdoors, connection to the natural environment. So the building is located to the eastern side of the site, adjacent to the grove of trees that are existing and adjacent to the park farther to the east. Secondly, it was established very early on that a shared parking agreement would be pursued with the building to the south on site, the office building to the south. So what that was able to do was, one, save some money on parking and put more money into the building. Secondly, it was able to allow us to have more area on the site for the natural environment, to leave that as is, and then to create more plazas to the south, where you see that new grove of trees to the south of the building that opens up to the, and I'm sorry I don't have a pointer, but just to the south of the lobby. And then also a performance lawn that will, over time, become more and more developed and more activated. And then lastly, the orientation of the building. It's in a more east-west orientation, which just allows the building, again, getting back to environmental sensitivity that is ingrained in the building design. That orientation allows us to control the solar heat gain of the building more easily in the summertime, and then in the wintertime, we're able to, when the sun's at a lower angle, have more heat gain when it's desired. We could move to the exterior. So this exemplifies the main entry of the building, and that connection, that indoor-outdoor connection of the building. Sometimes that gets used a little too often, that it's a little bit of a cliche, but really that is the essence of this building, the lobby, and that connection to the indoor-outdoor. In the plan, you can kind of tell a little more that it's hard to tell on the lobby really where it begins and ends. So this view is looking from the south into from the new grove that again we were able to incorporate into the design because we were able to minimize the parking counts by that shared parking agreement.
Part of one of the goals that we wanted to illustrate with the planning house is how all the arts disciplines have equal measure. And so to kind of highlight that and point it out, from the lower lobby on the screen, which is this portion here, you'll see that there's an entrance to 3 of the 4 main programmatic spaces of the building. The visual arts was represented with the gallery space. The main theater can house theater, performances, music, dance, graduations, a lot of other different types of events. The studio theater is the other venue off of the lobby. So the lobby is centrally located, but then a lot of the 3 major programmatic functions of that need audience participation are pinwheeled off of that. It also is reflective of the UIL competitions that the fine arts department participates in for the state of Texas. So one of the aspects of the planning is how UIL competitors will move through the building in a competition setting. So to kind of lay that out, this east side entrance is going to be for competition entries, and the performer or the competitors would warm up in the studio theater. Then they will leave the studio theater and enter to the main theater, do the performance on the stage, exit, and then down the hall and into the rehearsal room where they do their the reading part of the competition. And that way, competitors don't have to interact and have any cross contamination or pollination or problems. You can also see that, as Wes was saying, the indoor-outdoor connection, we try to allow as much light as possible into the space where it's warranted. We're not going to have light in a studio theater, or natural light, and we won't have natural light in a performance main theater, but all the public spaces have ample supply of daylight. And so that's kind of represented in the interior rendering. So there's skylights above to allow light to penetrate deep into the spaces. And then to the left of the image, you'll see curtain wall glass that allows the views back out to some of the groves and natural parks that we described on the slide. Interior of the art gallery component, lit above with a skylight. Again, trying to represent all the art components, not just focus on a few. The interior of the studio theater, the students have ability to, and they will be as part of their academic program with fine arts, doing the performances, but then also maintaining the facility. So the person on the catwalk is a student, not a special reading training. And then inside the rehearsal room, this room is more flexible because it can be divided for student use into two sport spaces, but then also professional learning, professional development for faculty or staff. And then the final image that we have is of the main theater. This again is probably the most flexible and usable space because it has the most amount of seats. Again, to house music performances, theater, drama, dance, and then other uses that the district needs that are not associated with fine arts. So, for instance, graduations or other large assembly space needs. And that's what we have for you this evening. If, like Randy said, if there's any questions about the programming, we're happy to take them now or move to the next part and take them later.
Okay, any questions for David and Wesley?
No questions. One comment I have on your goal number 5. You wrote, deliver a facility with spaces that sound as good as they look. I hope you're thinking about them looking good, because otherwise I don't have high expectations for sound.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's at the forefront of what we do. This is going to be, I mean, really, it's a world-class facility. It's definitely achieving that goal, absolutely.
So, Randy, do we already have our access agreement in place with the office building to the south, or is that in the works?
On the reciprocal parking agreement, they have verbally agreed to that, and we have not gotten that signed yet. The city has approved it and is in the process of approving that, but we do still have to obtain signatures on both parties.
And that includes the driveway access, because it looks like our buses will pull in, drop off, and then go out around to the south of that office building. That's included?
Yes, it
That
is.
kind of, okay.
That actually is our, that's actually our.
The bus loop
property.
is Plano's property.
The way the property works, it includes that little.
Oh, really?
That little driveway on the other side of the.
This drive.
Even better.
Right here that
Can we
the
go
mouse
back?
is Plano property.
Yes, we actually own that on the south side.
Okay.
Of the facility.
Cool.
Squeeze them then.
That's right. Mr. Owen.
Right,
We can't get them surrounded.
Thank you very much for that visual presentation. Randy, do you want to walk us through your
Sure.
messaging?
Can we switch over to the other PowerPoint? Okay, so these figures were provided by the Fine Arts, and Kathy Cudis is here with us tonight as well. The secondary program enrollment is just under 22,700 students, which is about 79% of our secondary students are involved in at least one of the programs that's listed below, between art, band, choir, dance, orchestra, speech, and theater. When we looked at projected uses, Fine Arts is projecting that they will use the facility 100 to 170 days per year. You can see a breakdown of that. I'm happy to read those. I think you can read them for yourself. But if you've got any questions there, I can try to answer those, or I'm sure Kathy can answer. But you can see the breakdown as far as the number of days that equates up to the 100 to 170.
I just have one question. Does dance include drill team? I know the girls have their spring shows, that sort of thing.
Sure.
Okay, all right, thank you.
That number is really students who are just enrolled in fine arts dance.
Okay.
So drill team would be in addition to those numbers.
And a continuation on the projected usage.
Randy, in the previous slide, the 100 to 170, that includes everything below.
That's
all
correct.
the bullets below.
That's correct. You can see that.
So this doesn't include some other items that could fall there, like professional development,
That's
the
the
drill
next.
team.
Yeah, we do have district professional learning activities, 4 to 10 days. There are 2 rooms there that have a dividing wall, which so can be one big or 2 small, that will be very attractive for district professional development, not only in fine arts, but also in other areas. Any other questions there?
So just to summarize these last 2 slides, we're talking about 100 to 170 and probably up to about 50 for the second one. So we're talking about our district usage that we cannot generate revenue on of between 150 to 220. That's for us. No?
Kathy shaking.
That 100 to 170 is inclusive of both slides.
Okay. So the total is 100 to 170. Thank you.
Okay, so when we look at the guaranteed maximum price, this has been a long process in design as far as cost estimates. Also, we opened bids on these back on July 11, and as far as bid opening day, we were somewhere around 58 to 60 million. So there was a lot of work that was done, a lot of scope work, just trying to see if there's any overlap from the different sub bids. We also went through and did some value engineering. We also looked at our ad alternates, and were able to add a few of those back in. And at the end of that whole process that we've had multiple meetings on, we're at a guaranteed maximum price of $53,334,356. The total construction cost, as far as what was included in the bond, was $63.55 million. And so we think that we are right at that number, maybe a little below, depending on how our contingencies come out and our furniture, fixtures, and technology. But we do feel good that we're going to be able to stay within the construction budget on this project, and hopefully even have some savings that we can return at the end of it. There was a land component that was in there for $5 million, and we were able to come in on that one at $4,302,714, and so we also have an additional right at $700,000 that's sitting in a land contingency. And so we feel good that we'll be able to stay within the total project cost, including land, of $68.55 million, unless we just run into something unforeseen.
So on the UIL competitions, if you're hosting a UIL competition, are you not compensated for hosting?
There's no rental that comes with that. No.
Okay. Not like
What are we paying?
I'm sorry?
We're paying $39,000 a year.
So last year, that number was projected at $39,000. I believe 2 years ago in a previous presentation, that was closer to $16,000. But we would see some savings on facilities that we rent if we had this facility.
No, the question, I think David's question as well, is if we're paying, and right now, we're paying to participate in UIL competitions.
We pay entry fees, that's correct.
Right, so wouldn't
So
we?
that goes strictly to pay for adjudicators.
Okay.
The,
So are those expenses we're still going to incur?
sure.
So I guess what I was thinking about is I know during football season, during the playoffs, we can rent stadiums out and we get compensated, right? Isn't that right? We get paid for the use of the stadium. I was just wondering if there was something like that in UIL competitions for fine arts.
That's not the habit in fine arts.
Joram, I think the answer to your question is, there are some times where our auditoriums do not have the capacity to host the size of the group performing, so we have to rent outside
Right.
facilities. It's not UIL, it's not necessarily UIL related. Kathy, maybe you can explain that better than I can.
Sure. So, anytime, well, our largest auditorium currently is just under 700 seats. So anytime we bring multiple groups together, either on a single campus, a choir and orchestra that combine for a presentation, or we bring students up in the feeder pattern, middle schools to the high school or so on, the capacity of those halls is not large enough for the audience that comes with all of those students performing at the same time. So our directors are current, and their support system, booster clubs, et cetera, are currently renting facilities in the community that have roughly 1,000 to 1,500 seats for those kinds of activities, because we don't have a district site where those could take place. So that's where we're anticipating some savings, because we will not have to go outside the district to rent those facilities.
But if other districts want to hold their events in our facility, then we can collect
Yes,
those
yes.
39 or more.
Yes.
Sure.
Okay.
But
So
wasn't the
we're not
original-
going to be spending the extra 39 that we were spending this year. But, okay, we'll get to the potential of generating revenue.
But wasn't the original construct that we would be using it so much, there would be almost no opportunity for outside parties to rent?
Well, I think we never said that there would not be any opportunity, but as you saw from the number of dates that we're proposing, there will be some limits to what is possible, and the conversations that we've had with our arts partners in the community is based on sort of the typical school cycle. There would be some opportunities if you're willing to put your holiday concert the third weekend in December, when school is out or we're in exam week and those kinds of things, because there will be obvious facilities availability during that period, but the first 2 weekends are probably not a possibility. So it may be about rethinking some of the timing for our local arts partners if they wish to take advantage of the space by looking at some changes in perhaps some of their historical timing.
But if I look at the 100 to 170, I can almost assume that we will be able to rent this facility 150 to 200 days a year.
It's theoretically possible.
You mean in the summer primarily?
Not necessarily. Sundays.
When we're not using it.
On Sundays.
Weekends, Sundays, heck, even on days when we do use them, but we don't use them in the evening.
I mean, all of that is theoretically possible, Dr. Solomon. Some of it has to do with what kinds of activities are currently in the space. For example, if we're in production for a large-scale theatrical production, the stage is going to be set, and it's going to stay set through several weeks of rehearsal. So that space, while there might not be rehearsals or students on site during the daytime, the evenings would be full and the space would sort of be off limits for other kinds of things to happen. In other situations, we may be able to turn the space around 2 or 3 times in a single day with professional learning and a concert that just needs some chairs. I mean, it's going to be very fluid. And depending on what the needs are, what the various performances are, we've tried to design the building so that it is theoretically possible that all of the major spaces could be in use simultaneously. That's probably not going to happen a great deal of the time, but it is certainly possible that we could have a small-scale production in the studio theater while a larger concert is going on in the main hall, and have an art reception in the gallery all at the same time.
Kathy, will this affect students in terms of, I know some of the theater productions have 3 performances in a weekend over 2 weekends because they're trying to get all of their folks to be able to see the production. Will that change that kind of timeline
We're hoping that it will. All of the nuts and bolts of the scheduling is sort of one of the next phases. While they're building the building, we're building the calendar. So some of those things still have to be fleshed out, how that will work, but we've had conversations about rotating the major theatrical productions through this facility so that there are some nuts and bolts of the way that the royalties and all of those kinds of things. The more seats you have, the more it costs you to do the show. So there are some balances to be had in those kinds of things, but certainly all of those things and more. I'm sure that there are things we haven't even imagined yet that will end up in this space because we have such a space to do it in.
I have a question, unless it was covered. I apologize. I was curious about the square footage, where the original plan, it was 127,500 square feet, and now it's down to 79,350 square feet. So actually, we've lost 38% of our building, as we had talked about it in the community as this was being considered. And so that's a pretty dramatic drop. So my question is, was that
where did it go?
Where did it go, and are we okay with that? And I use as an example, back to the fourth early childhood, we traded 4 classrooms for a cafeteria, came in about the original price, and there were convulsions. And so to get rid of 38% of our square footage, I think that needs discussion.
Sure. I'm sort of looking at David across the room, and maybe you can jump in and help me, but one of the things that our team has done to help our district team is they've really held our hand through this process. And my understanding is these buildings always start a little larger than you need them to be so that you can shrink them to something you can afford. So our first couple of go-rounds, we did have wider hallways and slightly larger dressing rooms and some things like that. And as we went through our budgeting process, knowing that we had a firm cap on our budget for construction, those were the kinds of conversations that we had, and the design team was great about tightening up the flow of the building and the connectivity of appropriate spaces so that we didn't need quite as much square footage to accomplish the same things. And I think my team, and I think that the design team also feels as though we have not lost anything in the way of efficiency in the space by narrowing that and bringing the square footage inside the budget.
I think our final number was 81,118 square feet. So, I mean, roughly the 79,000 square feet, but a couple thousand more. So that was the final number. And really, during programming, working through the process, it was about right-sizing the spaces. And getting those spaces to what they actually need, not necessarily where it was at the beginning. So I think, yeah, we've accomplished all of the goals of the facility and keeping it possible.
Yeah, just a couple of comments there, and I'm really late to the game as far as getting involved in this project. It was at this square footage, it was this design when I arrived last November. I don't think we've made any changes as far as its spaces. When I did look back, though, the 127,000 square $127,500 that I believe was in a bond planning presentation also had the total projected cost of $78.8 million, and so that number was brought down to $68.55, and so I'm assuming, again, I'm late to the game, but I'm assuming $10 million of that was just to try to get it down to the amount that actually went into the bond. Then some other things. Typically, when you go out for a bond, you don't really, and again, I don't know how this was presented, but you don't typically nail down a square footage. You nail down a cost and you nail down a scope. And this is the service that we want to provide out of this facility. I've never built a school that I went out for a bond and said we're building exactly this many square feet. We went off current cost estimates on what we thought would serve the programming, and through design that number changes, and it may increase, it may decrease. But the other big factor is just the inflation, the construction inflation that we've seen over the last 3-4 years, and especially the last 24 months has been very, very fast paced. And I would assume that that's also played a part in trying to address some of the issues like Kathy talked about, that you start shrinking dressing rooms and lobby areas and things like that, but you try to keep the functionality of the facility. For example, the auditorium and some of those is close to what your standard, is your target was when you entered into the project.
I guess I just have an email from Steve Fortenberry that was April 24th, 2016. So that was about the time the bond was being voted on. And in that, he uses the 127,500 square feet and the total cost of $63 million. So as late as that point, which was probably 5 or 6, 7 months into the planning process, that was still the square footage. And I guess my point to beat the dead horse is here you got rid of 38% of the square footage. Another project where you traded out 4 classrooms for a cafeteria and there were convulsions. And so I'm struck by the difference in response.
And I would say on Early Childhood 4, it actually came in over budget when we bid it with the 4 classrooms. It initially was programmed to be more like Isaac's. It was later, the kitchen was added, the cafeteria was added, and when it went out for bid, it was more than $1 million over budget, closer to 2, and so so we did look at some value engineering. We did look at taking out 4 classrooms with the opportunity, because where we took them off, that if later in the bond, if we met our capacity in that building, we would be able to add those back if the board decided to.
Randy, do you have another slide?
I do have one on projected annual operating costs. Again, we're about 2 years out from opening this facility if it is approved, but these are our maintenance and facilities best estimate, just based on average square footage. So you can see what those are. Custodial also is a little bit hard to determine, just because there probably will not be full-time custodial staff there. It will be like a stadium that you'll bring them over when you actually use the facility, because there's going to be days it's not used and there's going to be nothing to clean like there is at a school when it's used every day. And so we'll still have to continue to work on the schedule and the cost. The other is staffing. I think internally we're still, we probably still have work to do as far as how much staff it's going to take. There's different theories on that, and I would just say we're going to look, if we're not having to use some of the staff that are currently operating the current auditoriums because there's not a production going on there, we think we can pull some of those over. So we're going to do everything we can, I guess is my story there, about to be as efficient as we can, and we're not going to add any staff there that we can't keep busy. So that's a to be determined number. Again, we're about, as Kathy and them continue to work on the schedule, that will give us a better idea of what we're going to need as far as staffing. But I hate to throw a number at it just because we really don't have a good idea at this point in time. But we will be as conservative as we can be on staffing.
Can I ask you a question quickly, Randy? Since the operating cost is going to cost us per year to operate the facility $335,000.853, are we budgeted for that for 2020?
That is something. Sorry, go ahead.
Will we have that income to pay for it?
So that is something we would have to build into the budget 2 budgets from now. I wish I could answer your question on what we will and won't have. I can tell you after a legislative session that comes up this spring, I'll have a better idea on that. you've seen the long-term forecast if school finance doesn't change. And so that would be a consideration there. Again, my crystal ball's pretty cloudy when it comes to projecting out school finance for a couple of years.
So the cost avoidance value, based on what you know right now, what we won't have to spend, is how much against this?
So we think
Is
about
that
$39,000 on rental as far as what we're renting outside.
Academy graduation is 8.
It's 8 in by itself, but it's incorporated in that, right, Sarah?
Right.
It's part of that. I think it's part of that 39.
No, it's separate.
Okay, it's not part of that 39. So if you add in that 8, it'd be,
What is
47.
the 8?
Academy graduation is an outside rental at the Eisman,
An
which
income.
we could bring back in-house.
That we're currently spending on the Eisman.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So that would be a one-off set. Also, if the facility is rented out, and that's another one, I wouldn't even have a guess at how much it might be rented. But if there was rental income, it would be a revenue source for this facility.
And then any other opportunities you might have for corporate relationships for any parts of the building would be potential as well. Is that right?
That is definitely a possibility, with board approval, of course.
Okay.
Any other questions on annual operating cost?
Well, the thing is, I want to add it, it's like, if we add 39,000 to 8,000, that's about 47,000.
Yes.
And then to operate the facility, it's going to be about 7 times more than what we used to rent out other facilities to use. So our cost is going to be about 7 times more per year just to operate it, compared to what we're using for rental pricing.
And there could be, I mean, really, there's going to be a lot that goes into the scheduling on this, but there could be some savings if you're not using the current auditoriums and you're not having to heat and cool those. But so there may be some additional savings. I just hate to get into trying to speculate on what those dollars could be, because you would be having a shifting to some degree of use where you're having to heat and cool current facilities where you may not have to have those units running when you have these units running. Potentially.
So Randy, can you talk about the capital for this building? Have we already acquired the capital? Have we already borrowed the money?
Yes.
To build
Yes,
the building?
we've issued the bonds already, and that's when the majority of that was done, or all that was done when Mr. Fordberry was here to take advantage of low interest rates as far as bond rates. So all the facilities, the bonds have been issued for. So the only things remaining are technology, the additional elementary, if it's constructed due to growth, if it's needed due to growth, the additional classrooms for elementary schools, there's $5 million in the bond for that. And there's land, I believe that's $4 million that also hasn't been issued. And so yes, all the facilities other than that elementary that may or may not happen in the future, the additional elementary classrooms and future land purchase, everything else has been issued.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay. Do I have a motion from the board?
I move that the Board of Trustees approves amending the contract CSP 2017-062, Fine Arts Center Construction Manager at Risk, guaranteed maximum price with McCarthy Building Companies to provide the guaranteed maximum price of $53,334,356, subject to a negotiated and executed contract.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. I have a motion by Jerry Chambers, a second by Nancy Humphrey, that the Board of Trustees approve amending contract CSP 2017-062, Fine Arts Center Construction Manager at Risk, guaranteed maximum price with McCarthy Building Companies to provide the guaranteed maximum price of $53,334,356, subject to a negotiated and executed contract. Is there any discussion?
So I wanted to ask, first of all, I wanted to really appreciate what you've done with our discussion of early childhood You did a lot of research that helped us. I would like to ask that if we can delay that decision. First of all, I'll put this in perspective. I played 3 instruments. I played since I was in 2nd grade. I managed to get my older daughter, to play, and she did the orchestra here for 7 years. So I know how, no, not 7 years. 7 years, middle and high school. And so I know about the Allen UIL competitions in Allen High School. I'm not there yet in 2 areas where I think we can address that with just a little more work. We do have that TBD there that bothers me in staffing. And I kind of, as you were talking, I was doing back of the envelope again on the number of days that it is available. I'd like to ask that we get this number. Missy, I was telling you that the number I remembered was 500,000, but that was the original cost estimate for maintenance. So as I was looking through Randy's, your response to Tammy, I realized that you're not talking about the current one. This is the previous one. The current one is the 336 plus TBD staffing. I'd like us to put a number behind that TBD. We do need to subtract from this the 39 and the 8. And I really do think that we can come up with a general plan. I mean, we don't know the future exactly, but we know where we are. We know what the demand is. If all we need to compensate is take the 335, I don't know what the TBD would be. I don't know if it's going to take us to 400. Take down the 39, take down the 8, so maybe we're at 360, 350 or something like this. Given the rental cost of facilities like this, I think that we have enough available days to cover this, but I'd like somebody to kind of go through the numbers and give us a reasonable, I understand it's never going to be accurate, but a reasonable estimate. That's one. The other is I would really feel much more comfortable approving what is really a $69.55 million project after we have a long-term debt plan, which I know that we're going to be discussing hopefully in our work session. So if we can delay this to get those pieces of information, this could be probably the next board meeting. We can get that.
Here's going to be the challenge with that. I believe McCarthy is in the room. We've got Danny back here. When they bid this project out, I believe we had the same conversation on Early Childhood 4, but those bids are only good for a certain time period.
Mm-hmm.
If we lose the current bids and we have to go back out, I just warn you, we run the risk of some of them not responding again. We don't know what bid prices will be, and we have spent the better part of 5 weeks, I believe, negotiating and working through these bids. I can't tell you how many hours Danny has been doing that and his team. But so I just warn you, that's the caveat. If you delay, it's not as easy always. And Danny, can you speak to how long those bids are good for?
Yeah, they're good for 90 days from July 26th to October 9th. It may seem like a long time, but really we're ready to start contract negotiations as soon as we leave out this building. So it's very time sensitive. We really don't want to push the like risk cost escalation we've seen in the last 2 years.
So again, don't get me wrong, I'd love to have that facility, I really would. And the only 2 reasons I'm not there is I'd like to know how the $69.5 million fits in an overall long-term debt plan. And the other part, I really think that it should probably be an easy task to calculate. And who knows, maybe we can do that in the work session this month, long before the 90 days, just get those numbers so I'll feel more comfortable that we can cover the expenses, the maintenance expenses. We're just talking about recapture and the fact that our budget is going to have a cumulative deficit of $96 million unless property values level off, in which case throw in another $40 million. I'm very careful with $500,000 or close to $500,000 that we can't cover. I do think we can cover it, but at this point, it's just my gut feeling. I'd like to see a plan that shows how we cover it. Again, I believe that you can. And the other part is, again, the long-term debt plan. I would feel more comfortable approving a $70 million project.
But we have already borrowed the money.
I understand.
We've already taken the debt, it's already reflected in the tax rate.
I understand.
And can I address that for a second, Missy? So on the 5 million land, and I'm trying to read some small print here, was part of the first issue that was done in August of 2016, and I'm not as familiar with that debt issuance. The 58.55, sorry, I'm trying to read these. Okay, I'm sorry, the 5, okay, of the 63 million that's just for the facility, so forget the first part that I said. 5 million of that was issued in the 2016. The rest, the 58,555,000, was issued in the August 2017 issue. In that issue, the rate was the bond rate was a 1.58, I believe. So the interest rates were extremely low when that was issued. Additionally, the average life of those bonds, according to our financial advisor, was either 3.6 or 3.8 years. So it was issued over 20 years, but so much of that principal amount is front-loaded that it's got an average maturity of either 3.6 or 3.8 years. So again, if you, that was $120,050,000 issuance, and the average bond in that will be paid off in just over 3.5 years. So if that gives you an idea of the debt.
So can you say that another way? So that issuance was in 2017.
That's correct.
Are you saying that, so we've borrowed the money and we've already been paying our
That's true. We have
P&I since
correct.
last year. That's year one. And if you're saying it will be paid off in 3.5 years, does that mean it'll be paid off by the time it's on the ground?
Well, the average of that entire 120 million pays off in just over 3.5 years. So some of those dollars won't be paid until year 20, but so much of it's front loaded that the average amount is paid out in just over 3.5 years.
Yeah, that was actually
rate.
part of the reason why we authorized the issuance at that, when we did. So I mean, to your point about a long-term debt plan, it's not developing one, we have one. And we issued bonds at 1.58% because it was a historic low. And so it was the smart move.
And I don't disagree. So here's the question. If for some reason we did not approve this, we have the money, we already borrowed the money. What is the process if we wanted to repurpose this money for other activities that we issue bonds for, capital projects?
So we would have to go back to the language that the voters approved, which I believe was for any new facility modifications, technology, or buses, I believe, or land. So the board could make the decision to repurpose any of the bond money within those general categories.
But let's say that it was approved specifically, and I believe it was approved specifically for this purpose. What happens then?
It wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't issued specifically for. As far as legally on the ballot language, it did not say that 68.55 million will go for a fine arts center.
But in the communication with the public, it did.
That's
I
right.
think
So
that's
there's
what
two
you're
different
probably
things.
talking-
So
that's
if
what
you
he's
ask,
talking
and I had this conversation with bond counsel on a couple of projects recently, but so the legal answer is all you have to do is meet the voter language. Now the other is just the political side of this is the way we promoted it. How do we want it? How much is the board willing to deviate from that?
So the legal language might not prevent us from saying, we have all the other renovation projects, major projects, we can use the money for that. Legally, we're not bound. I would still want to go out to but what you're saying is this is a communication thing.
That's right. What I'm saying is it's not a legal answer because legally the board has flexibility as long as it stays within those categories. It comes down to more what are the board's goals on how they want to spend it and how much do they want to follow the original bond plan.
Right, and I'm saying we still have a moral responsibility because the voters, when we ask them, maybe this was not exactly in the language, but when we ask them, we show them a 68.55 or 60 68.55 million project for this. We told them, so if we wanted to change, I think we do have the moral obligation to go back to the voters and say, we're changing. But I'm not there either. Where I am right now is I would like to know what our long-term debt plan is, how do we reduce it? Because right now, I looked at the numbers, if I remember correctly, we're paying about $45 or $47 million this year in interest alone. That's almost the entire, what we're trying to approve today, a 53 million project. So if we could reduce our level of debt, and you know, I've been pursuing that since my first board meeting in June of 2015. But this is, again, this is not where I am yet. I would love to have this facility, but I would like to have the answers to how do we reduce the operational cost through renting it, have some kind of estimate, plus the personnel on the operational side, on the M&O side. On the debt, I would like to know where we stand on having a long-term debt reduction plan, not just a debt plan, but debt reduction.
So I think, I mean, we've had this conversation before at the table with regard to the debt, and I know you're concerned with the debt that's been issued, but this board, for the entire 7 years that I've been on it, has been diligently working on our debt cap and what we're paying. And we have refinanced bonds over the years multiple times to save this district hundreds of millions of dollars. So I don't think that there's not a plan in place. I think there is a plan in place that we looked at last time we issued bonds. Recall, we had the conversations about wanting to issue shorter term bonds as opposed to longer term so that we could get them paid off more quickly. So while I'm happy that we're going to have a discussion about it at some point in the future, I think what I expect to find is that the plan we put in place last time we issued bonds is the same plan we're following, and it's working.
I agree. I forget what year it was, spring of 2016, we refinanced future payments by saving $77.6 million, or 16% of our outstanding debt. And as part of the financing strategy for the new bond program, which we just sold in 2017, the maximum length of any new bond has been reduced from 25 to 20 years. Buses and technology items will continue to be amortized over 10 and 5 years respectively. So we do have a plan. And we're currently, by law, you set your INS tax rate on what it takes to amortize your debt. So we've already issued those bonds. So we have not abandoned our strategy at all.
So by the way, when I spoke to Steve right after that board meeting where I objected to the bond, but on a different basis, and that is that we didn't separate items. But in that meeting, right after that meeting, Steve came to me and said, by the way, with all of those actions, with refinancing the bonds, with shortening to 20, with the windfall that we got from lower interest, he believed that we saved probably $200 to $250 million in overall debt. In overall debt payments over the entire period. I don't doubt that. To me, it really comes. When we just had a discussion about the tax rate, and we talked about our M&O and the fact that our M&O stayed flat at 1.117. which represented a 5.4 something percent increase in effective rate, but we get, not only that we don't get any of it, we actually give more than that increase to the state. That's not true for INS. We stayed on INS the same rate of 26.9 for 3 years, I think, something like this, but property values went up. Recapture did not affect this, so we keep collecting more and more in INS. That's why I'd like to see a long-term plan, and I'm sorry, I would have to disagree that we have a plan. I think that we caught a few good opportunities to reduce the overall level of debt and debt payments, but we still don't have a plan. I'd like to see a long-term plan that would reduce our debt so that more of what we collect in INS would actually go to pay the principal on what we borrowed that gives us the ability to build buildings, versus interest.
Well, I think the day that we called the bonds, we knew that the 481 million in bonds that we took in, based on the date of the election of the board to call those bonds, or issue those bonds, 5 years after that period, we were going to have less debt on the books than we had the day we called the election. So the amortization schedule has been very aggressive to pay down the principal and interest, and that's why we're in the position we are with the AAA, Moody's, and AA, you know, without even having to lean on the state for credit rating.
So can I kind of recap where we are? Because we still have agenda to go, and let me just recap what we've got on the table before us right now. We have a motion and a second to approve this particular item. We're having discussion. During the course of discussion, you've indicated a desire for more information, number one, wanting to know the staffing question. I've heard an answer to that question. I haven't heard anybody mention it here today, but I know I've heard a number, about one person being a staff person assigned to that. But I'm not the expert, I'm just telling you what I've heard. The other question is to your question about overall debt. Personally, I think that's because of we've already undertaken that. I feel like that is a tangential question that I know is important to you, and I think you're looking for that financial. What I'm hearing is strategy talk. You know that there has been a financial strategy in place. I know you want to see the numbers on a scale of years 1 to 20 and how that strategy is played out. I think that's what you're wanting.
Yeah.
But I kind of think
the board has that.
But I think
The board has that not considering future bonds. And that's what we've always seen. And this, we're not unique in that. What you see we're taking new debt, and then here's how it's going to zero, not considering, oh, by the way, 5 years from now, we're going to take something new. And the conversation I had with Randy and with Sarah is, how do we have long-term? I don't want to belabor the point.
So the point I'm wanting to make is, I hear what you're saying, but I think that's tangential to this issue. And I know that it's coming at a future board meeting for, reflection. And
I just wanted to add to the point you summarized that we want to see the TBD number.
yes, so with regard
and
to operating costs.
projections of revenue.
Yeah, revenue projections, okay. So here's what I would say. Because we have a motion and a second on the table, in order to, we have to entertain that at this point, or you have to make
So I'll make a motion.
An amendment, and they have to accept it. So, is that right?
You can make a friendly amendment.
You can make a friendly amendment,
Or
and
if Jerry wants to
Or a
withdraw.
motion to
or if she wants to hold the
table.
vote,
Or withdraw her motion.
or we would hold the vote. So Jerry made the motion and Nancy made the second. So it's
So
your
I would
option.
like to make a motion, not to amend, because I don't think that it can be amended. I would like to table it until we have the answer to those questions.
And then I
But
would second it.
I don't think it doesn't work that way. We have a motion and a second on the floor. Okay, so either you offer a friendly amendment to the author, and then we have to get a second to that friendly amendment, and then we vote on that friendly amendment. Is this right, Sharon? Or if you offer the friendly amendment and she does not choose to accept it, then we consider the question that is before us. Is this correct?
That's right. He can make a motion to table to a specific time, if you prefer, but her motion will still stand. It depends on whether
I
this
think
passes or not.
of my recollection of Robert's Rules of Order, if I make a motion to table, we can vote on the motion to table. If we agree, then we just table the original motion to a later date.
Right, if it doesn't pass, then first goes.
Say that again, please. I want to get it right.
If a motion was made, the motion was seconded, anyone can make a motion to table it to a specific date. I would even say, let's table it to the work session, not even go to October. If that motion gets seconded and voted on and we are in support of tabling it, then the original motion gets tabled to that date.
Right. If it doesn't, then we go with Jerry's motion.
If it doesn't
Okay.
pass.
But you have to go up the ladder and down the ladder.
Yeah. That's 7 years of IEEE discussions on Wi-Fi.
Well, Sharon's she's our paralegal and parliamentary expert, so I'm kind of counting on you to guide us. So, are there any questions about process here that?
What is it that Yorm wants?
I would like to table it until the work session, until we have.
What is
the
that date?
The 18th or 19th? Today's
September
18th? September 18th.
And I second.
Okay, so any discussion?
Yeah, how long is our contract locked in, this contract?
He is saying till October 11th.
Right.
Subcontractors, and we would want to proceed as if it's going to, we would buy on average contracts today, next month, we start tomorrow, which is interesting.
I really, I can't hear. Would you be able to come to the mic, please? Thank you.
So what they're saying is it takes a certain amount of time once you approve the GMP for them to authorize all the contracts with all the subcontractors.
Right. My name's Danny. I represent McCarthy Building Company as the construction manager. What I was exactly trying to explain was we're under contract, or we have bids that are valid until October 9th. What that means is if we were to move forward as expected today, we would have about 2 contracts a day until October 9th to negotiate and finalize. Any motion to move beyond today would just shorten up the duration, which makes it quite difficult and quite costly, quite frankly. It's very...
So shortening this would require you to negotiate all the contracts within basically a 2-week period. Okay.
And what are the costs? So when you say the costs go up?
It
Can you
very well
explain?
could be. You've got contractors that have been working on this project for, in some cases, a year, and have put a lot of their time and effort, and very well could lose interest. It's a possibility. The steel market in particular, for some of those trades in the steel, Divisions 5 and throughout the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, which are quite frankly the biggest contracts that we have at risk. So losing interest, and quite frankly, if those bids expire, it's unlikely that we'll get their participation again.
Then now you're making me worried about other things, because I'm not sure what will happen after we approve it. So I'm going to assume that we're pretty safe, and you give us 90 days, you do give us 90 days. I think what we did about a month or 2 months ago, we were at exactly the same point with the 4th early childhood school, and we had a very similar discussion. And I think that after today, we are so much smarter and can make better decisions. I'd like to be there, and frankly, if we can be there in 2 weeks, let's be there in 2 weeks.
I don't know what that means.
If we can have the answer to those questions.
But what he's saying is you're taking an expensive risk.
Yeah, it seems to me like we're talking about $100,000 maybe, if you're talking about 2 people at $50,000 apiece to manage that property, and I don't know if that's what it would be, but if you're just guesstimating, if it's $100,000 that we're talking about in difference, you're talking about losing more than $100,000 on contract renegotiations if we don't get the locked-in prices.
I guess what I'm not understanding is if the contracts are good until October the 9th, the issue is that if we don't give you the go until 2 weeks from now, you're just going to have to work faster. You have a compressed time window, is that correct?
Correct, and I've never seen it done in that amount of time.
But it's not that those
Or-
contracts will expire until that October the 9th.
It's
Much
the
like-
terms of the contract with my husband's in this contracting industry, so I hear it from his side. So the GC goes back to the sub, and they've got to negotiate all of the terms. So it's not price. And then what happens then when you're negotiating terms, then that can get more expensive. So if they say, I've got less time it's not as simple as just holding the subcontractor to a price. He's got to negotiate all the terms with each one of them, and they've got to go back to legal and all of this.
That's exactly right.
Potentially giving your counterparty a little bit more leverage too, if they know that he's got 2 weeks to finalize, as
Right.
opposed to a month.
Okay, so are there any other discussion points? Okay.
Just brief, I mean, it's what y'all were discussing, but remember, this is construction manager risk, and it's the construction manager that's taking the risk. That's why you're approving a guaranteed maximum price. It's up to them to negotiate all those contracts and stay within that guaranteed maximum price. And so really, I mean, nothing is nailed down other than we have sub bids that weren't done through the district. They were done with the contractor. And so they are the ones that feel good enough at this point that they can lock in pricing at that amount if they have ample time to do that.
And it is worth noting, just today actually, we mentioned steel a minute ago, our current steel low bidder is not honoring his 90-day proposal, meaning that he's the first one that we are contacting pending an approval. So very much to Rena's point, I mean, we're holding the cards here and ready to move forward.
So since we're having some discussion, I mean, I'll explain my perspective is I think there's more risk by taking more time. I think the answers to the questions that you're seeking can be delivered by staff with direction to develop better revenue stream ideas and bring together a plan. I know you'll do that. I know you know that too. They will do that too. We just don't know exactly what the number is. We know it's a plus figure. And I just feel like that's a trade-off. Having that information in order to make a decision, I think, is a more expensive outcome for us. And that's
Ms.
just my
I
perspective.
have a question. What is, you mentioned earlier, potential revenue, corporate sponsorship? Is that what you're talking about, of certain theater naming or sort
Right.
of-
I mean, there are different spaces in there. You've got the art gallery, the performance space, the rehearsal space. I've seen other entities sell that for a certain period of time and get a certain revenue stream for that, and that defrays the operating cost. So they would have to, go after that. But I think they had to get through all of this design part first, and then move to the next phase, which is what I think you're talking about, developing facility rental and rules and.
Let me step back for a second. If the administration is willing to say, we will come up with a plan that makes this let's call it close to break even. I would even say close to break even to today, which means today we are spending money, because today we are spending $39,000. If we can make it, if you can tell us that you will have a plan that this is close to break even to where we are today, and that we will have a debt reduction plan, I don't know, let's put a time limit on it. I'll take it back and say, let's go ahead and approve. Because right now what I'm hearing is us making assumptions of we think we can do this, we think we can do that, but then at the end of the day, what we approved is close to a $500,000 annual expense, when we're seeing in 3 years down the road, $96 million plus potential $40 million in deficit, and we're going to regret this. So if you feel comfortable enough that you can show a close to break-even plan, and you will have a debt reduction plan in place, not in 2 weeks, but give us a time, I'll vote for it today.
Are you removing your motion?
No, I'm asking, I'm not removing it yet.
President Bender did not restate it, so it's really not on the floor. I mean, if you want to know where you're at with it, Norm made the motion, Angela seconded it, but you didn't restate it, so it's not on the floor.
So tell me if you want me to restate it, or if we
So
just leave it
before-
off the floor.
Let's give it to the administration. Tell me what you think. There are two things. Tell us that you can make a plan that would bring this, that you feel comfortable enough that you will make a plan that brings this close to break even from the operational expenses standpoint. and that we will have a debt reduction plan, give me an order of magnitude. I'll withdraw the motion before the president manages to restate it.
I guess here's a couple thoughts, and Sarah, please jump in if you see something different. But I feel as far as staffing, if you could just in your mind plug 100,000 there, I personally can't see us exceeding that. I personally can't see why we can't find enough efficiencies that we can keep staffing under 100,000. I can give you my word, I'll do all I can to keep it there. So I think if that's one of the numbers that you're concerned about, as far as coming up and saying it's revenue neutral, I have no idea where rentals could be. I have a hard time seeing that rentals could be $400,000 on this facility as much as we're using it. I don't think it's going to be available that much. It might be. I don't think the answers are going to be there. I don't think they're there today. I don't think they're going to be there in 2 weeks from now. And I don't know if they're going to be there in 6 months or a year from now until we really get down to detailed scheduling and knowing exactly what events we have going on during a 12-month period. So the only out I see is some type of corporate sponsorship that's going to have to come back to the board. If you want the total project to be revenue neutral, I don't see it getting there without a corporate sponsorship.
Not the cost of building, I'm talking about the
No,
maintenance.
I'm
part.
talking maintenance as well.
operations.
So
I'm
corporate
talking
sponsorship would
operations as
cover
well.
the maintenance.
My guess is it would take corporate sponsorships in total of $200,000 to $300,000 to make it cost neutral on an annual basis. And that's just me thinking off the top of my head.
And if you use back of the envelope, if we're paying $8,000 for the Eisman for graduation for the Academy High School, that's 50 days of rental that we would have to do to be at break even.
Well, I think when we undertook this in the beginning, we knew the estimate at the time was 50% payback. There was the cost, it was $500 back then, and they estimated $250, so 50%. So we were going to bear the other 50%, whatever the pie was going to be. And that was at that time, which was even less information that we have today. So, do you want me to restate your motion?
I just want to ask one last time, with $96 million of cumulative deficit plus possibly another $40 million, do you feel comfortable enough committing to getting it close to break even? Even if you don't have the plan right now?
I believe if the board is interested in corporate sponsorships on this facility, I believe we can get close to break even.
Heck, I'll take sponsorship from Frisco ISD.
Okay, and what is your pleasure?
So, can we get that as one of the, can we get this as a friendly amendment to the original motion that we will approve this today, subject to having a plan that shows at least a 50% cost reduction in maintenance?
Okay, when you say subject to, we would not be able to allow the construction firm to go until we could come back and show you that we could prove that we met your motion.
All we need to do is give direction for that.
I think we give the direction.
And would you?
Yes.
So that's all we need to do for that.
I think we can come back with a plan for how we can look at covering operating costs to at least 50% through either revenue, cost efficiencies, sponsorships, the combination thereof to offset operating. I don't think that's an unrealistic figure at all. To say we're going to get the whole 350,000, I don't know right off the bat if we can say that, but if we can get 50% or more, I believe that that's a realistic.
I think that's definitely realistic.
I think that's a realistic expectation to get us started in the right direction here.
So I'll throw the other one, without numbers obviously. What is the target to have a debt reduction plan? Timeline?
Oh, Brady, what does the financial?
Sure, that's something that I talked to our financial advisors about today.
Order of magnitude. Come work with me, I'm trying.
Are you talking timing?
Yeah.
So
To-
we can have
for a
that
debt reduction
conversation
plan.
in our board agenda planning
Yeah.
process. I mean, do you feel like you can get that done this fall?
Yes.
Okay. So, like October-ish? I mean, I don't know what is involved in that exercise.
So
It's not a standard exercise.
Okay.
And so it's something we're gonna have to craft about. Now, you have debt policies and we can review those, but as far as having a debt reduction plan, I've never seen one. Our financial advisors, I didn't get the feeling they had ever seen one. So it's really, it may be some of the same strategies that we've been doing. So I see that as a strategy list that I would bring. And then if there's any policies that you want to amend as far as your debt policy, you could do that. But as far as pulling one off the shelf and saying, here's our debt reduction plan, I'm not aware. I haven't checked all my sources, but I haven't found anybody that's seen one yet. As far as a plan, I've seen debt policies that can typically be amended to accommodate, as I emailed Durham today, there's many factors when you look at debt. It can be from what are the district needs to what are the interest rates to what is the property value growth, what is your current debt structure, what are your refunding opportunities. Advanced refundings are now gone, so that's no longer an opportunity. So it's all these different tools in the toolbox that we have of why we have financial advisors that are expert that look at this on a continual basis, and also have bond underwriters because they want the business, so they're always running numbers and sending them to us. And so it's really just how do you take all these tools in the toolbox and put it into what Plano ISD calls a debt reduction plan. We will work on it, but like I say, it's something that's going to take some crafting and then have to come back to the board to see, like any other plan, to see if the full board agrees.
So given that it sounds like it's a real back and forth kind of consulting effort associated with this, it's going to take a lot of dialogue and scope development. Could we say sometime this fall, like by, I don't want to shortcut, I mean, if he's wanting a date so that we can have this vote. I want to find a date so we can move on.
I mean, we've already
if you
been
say
in
fall,
contact.
I'm good
Is
with
you good
fall.
with that?
I don't want to know that we're going to, I don't want to talk about that. I'm not going to have a second term, okay? So I don't want this to drag beyond that. I want to know at some point that we, as a board and administration, got to the point that we feel comfortable that we have a long-term plan that considers future needs of the district and overall reduces the debt. That's, and if we
I
can.
would anticipate we could accomplish that by the regular November board meeting.
Okay. And that we feel comfortable that we will have a plan by the time that this building is built that compensates at least 50% of the costs through whatever sources of revenue. Then I withdraw my motion to table.
Okay.
I call for a vote.
Okay, hearing no further discussion, we'll now proceed to vote. So all in favor, please raise a hand. 5 in favor, all opposed. 1 opposed, all abstain. 1 abstain. Okay? So
I'm
the
just
vote is-
concerned about, just to make sure that we have the money for the other 50% to operate it.
So the motion passes 5 favor, 1 opposed, 1 abstention.
President Bender, our board operating procedures require anyone who abstains during a vote to explain their reasoning, and I'm happy to do so at this time. I'd like my statement to be recorded in the minutes, please. I'm a longtime supporter of fine arts. I was in band in high school. I was a dance mom forever. I was a PISD band mom for 7 years, but I will say that I never had to fight to find a seat at the concert at any grade level. I can't vote for luxuries for some kids, while others still have significant unmet educational needs in our district. If this board is going to operate from a mentality of scarcity, as a recent vote has shown, I don't see how we can approve a luxury at this time that will cost $63 million and incur $500,000 in additional operating expenses to save about $50,000 in rental fees. We need to value and support all the kids, not just the ones that Plano ISD has typically supported, or at some point in the near future, Plano ISD will no longer be the proud district that it once was. Finally, I look forward to seeing the 2018-2019 plan of work and the 2019-2020 budget to see if we are truly living our mission to provide an excellent education for each student.
Thank you. Board, would you like to take a recess at this moment? 5 minutes?
Yes, please.
Please return at 10:35.